You're listening to No Podcast for Old Men.
Hey, welcome to No Podcast for Old Men, the only podcast where three university professors provide philosophical insight to all of the Coen brothers films in chronological order. My name is Robert Jones, and I'm joined via Zoom by my colleagues, Professor Troy Jollimore in Chico, California, Professor Peter S. Fossil in Louisville, Kentucky. Today is our fifth episode. Troy?
Not counting the mezzanine.
We're going to talk today about the Coen brothers' fifth film, The Hudsucker Proxy, 1994.
Before we get to that, I've had something that's been bothering me. It's been on my conscience. It's so trivial, but yet it just bugged me. I don't know. And that is, at the end of the last one, we misidentified something. I mean, partly it's the landlubbers among us, but I held my tongue, but I was... So we talked about the bird that falls into the water, that dives into the water at the end of Barton Fink there. And
Mhm.
Yes.
we called it a seagull, but it's a pelican. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Oh, of course, it's a pelican. Oh
It's
my
a
God,
pelican.
Peter, you've been waiting for like months
I've
to
been
make this
waiting for months
correction.
to say.
I'm so sorry for you. This must have been agonizing.
So, anyway,
Well, welcome to the corrections section
Yes.
of No Podcast for Old Men. So we apologize for that misidentification of the bird and any listeners who were really bothered by that.
We can really dive into that. Was actually the what they call the North Pacific Sea pelican. In fact, that pelican's name was Fred.
Whoa.
We can really get detailed. Fred Pelican. I'm glad we got that. We correct. I'm glad you're on the case because you're kind of you're our detail guy.
That's the thing. You can see why. You can see.
Yeah, you're the detail man. What do you say we look at the film, and this is where we do our brief opening statement on what we think the film is about. You know, originally we called this our lightning round, but I think we can just abandon it. We can call it's less about lightning, more about like
It's opening statements like in a trial.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I like that.
Who wants to jump in there?
Peter, you ready to go?
Yeah, I think it's been customary. It's become customary. All right, so I like to do it in these like little lists. You ready? Here we go. It's a pastiche of homage to the romantic American screwball comedies and other American films of the 1930s and 40s, in particular what the philosopher Stanley Cavell calls comedies of remarriage. It's a film about personal identity and the education of a woman through a man and a man through a woman in a kind of heteronormative, anti-feminist, and anti-leftist Bill Dung's roman of remarriage and commerce. It's a film about the little guy from the working class defeating management and stockholders, then becoming a good capitalist. It's a film about the virtue of the Midwest and small town white America and its triumph over corrupt coastal capitalism and that on capitalism's own home turf. It's a film about the real and the apparent. Now we're getting more philosophical. It's the film about the real and the apparent, the true and the deceptive, about how the real emerges from the apparent, truth from lies, the revealed from the hidden, and the authentic self from phony selves. It's a film about the struggle of good and evil in the machinery behind it all, or maybe the struggle of factions of the working class that work for and against the powerful. And finally, it's a film about time, its cyclical fatalities, the way its relentless and merciless churn can be momentarily defied by love, by will, and by chance, creating a space where the heart can rule over or at least guide the head in a rejoinder to Plato and his intellect-driven philosopher kings and queens. In the end, former imbecile Norval rules with both intellect and compassion, head and heart, a theme connecting Hudsucker to Barton Fink and to Miller's Crossing. There you go.
Wow.
Nice. A lot to chew on. Love it.
That was extemporaneous, right?
No.
Peter does no preparation for
You're
this.
kidding me?
He just walks in here,
I
has a
wish.
couple drinks, and he goes.
I wish.
All right.
Peter,
Well,
it sounds like you may have see the film as somewhat more optimistic than I do, but we can talk about this as we go. But I love what you said.
I expected that.
Yeah.
wow. That was impressive. Troy, why don't you jump in here with your brief opening statement?
My brief opening statement. The
Yes,
Hudsucker
yes,
Proxy this is the last thing that Peter said, and it's the first thing that I'll say. It's a film about time and about two conceptions of time: linear time, the movement from past to future, the idea of progress and constant change, and time as a circle, a cycle, ritual time, the endless repetition of days, weeks, of the seasons, of human generations. And a film about who gets to control time, who has the power to set the time, stop the clock, and steal time from people's lives. It's really two films in one. On the surface, and this gets to, I think, what I just said to Peter, how we read it. On the surface, it's a bright, candy-colored comedy, a consoling fable, an anachronism-filled and entirely hilarious romp, a feel-good story that reassures us that the American dream is alive and well. A lark. Just beneath the surface, it is a thoroughly bleak, scathing satire of ruthless, soulless American capitalism, a system in which only the evil and the incompetent flourish, while the rest linger in the hellish depth of the mailroom with no hope for escape. A film that begins with two suicides, the real suicide of a successful businessman and the imminent suicide of the film's protagonist, a protagonist so profoundly flawed I can't bring myself to refer to him as a hero, whose ultimate escape from violent death is accomplished by means of a deus ex machina so flagrantly absurd that the reasonable viewer can only dismiss it as a fantasy, coming to the conclusion that the true conclusion of the film is in fact his death on the sidewalk. Most central, and I take that to be a contentious claim, and we'll come back to it, and I will defend it to the death.
I love it. I love
Most
it.
central, thank you. Most
Wow.
centrally, it is a film, about narrative, about popular culture and myth. It's a film set in a gloriously and obviously artificial universe in which nothing, including the characters and their emotions, feels real. It's a film loaded with references to earlier films by great American directors, including Frank Capra, Preston Sturges, and Alfred Hitchcock. Like Barton Fink, which preceded it, and like Fargo, which will follow it, it's a film whose primary concern is the nature of truth and of storytelling, the capacity of stories to mislead us. A film that asks the question, can anything we hear in a story or a myth or anything we see on a movie screen actually be true? There you go.
Wow.
So good.
Another extemporaneous.
Yes, didn't plan any of it, just came out.
Impressive. Well, let me see. I'm going to jump in. You guys, basically, everything you say, yeah, I agree with. I think a couple of, I'll try to add something to. So I think it's another, as you mentioned, Troy, it's another Coen Brothers movie about movies. I think so far, this is the most movie about a movie that they've produced. This is clearly a movie about screwball comedies and film, 1930s, 40s, 50s film in general. I think like Raising Arizona, Hudsucker concerns the American dream. And it's also a kind of cartoonish, has cartoonish elements like Raising Arizona. But and like the Raising Arizona, it is a critique, I think. It's a critique of American capitalism through we see worker exploitation and alienation. But I think in the end, it actually affirms American capitalism. I never see the Coens as being Marxist or that far to the left. So I think that this is a case where it critiques it, but it also affirms it. Given that Norville ends up he's a good capitalist. He's not a bad capitalist. So it doesn't repudiate capitalism. It's also like Raising Arizona. It also raises the myth of the meritocracy. We see Norville's, one of the things that's interesting is Norville's failure is what leads to his success. He fails as a mailroom clerk, and then that's what brings him capitalist success. And it's also, as you mentioned, guys, it's a film about the nature of time, cycles and rebirth and karma and transcendence and renewal. It's a film about the battle between good and evil. And let's see, it's also, lastly, it's a film about kind of a dark techno-bureaucracy and its relationship to capitalism. And we do want to think about Preston Sturges and Frank Capra. We also want to think about Brazil and Blade Runner and those kinds of films. Anyway, there you go.
Hey,
There's my,
you're holding that till the end, my friend.
I'm just, Troy said it was okay to throw a few out there.
Blame it on me.
Without diving in.
Hey, I do think that with this film, there are so many references to earlier films. They're so obvious. And it's clear that the Coens intended in a way for them to be obvious and for us to know about them, that you just have to start talking about them at least a little when you talk about the film at all. It's very much a film that exists in the universe of movies, not in the real world. I don't think there's a single thing in this film that is real or that is meant to be. It's all in quotes, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. It's all ironic.
I love, you academics love to see it that way, don't you?
The film demands that it be seen that way. It's not. I didn't see their other films that way, but this film, I mean, there's nothing here to take seriously. It's a very serious film, I think, in terms of its satire. And it sounds like I see it as much more critical of the status quo and capitalism as you guys do. But again, we'll talk about that.
We'll get to, I just want to say for our listeners that before we got on, we were saying, like, let's not get lost in the references, because it can happen.
It can happen.
Well, why don't we have a little summary for those, and we should, Troy, you can do your spoiler alert, because we're really going to dive into it. But Troy, you are our summary expert. Why don't we hear a summary of the film, The Hudsucker Proxy, so we can get an idea of what the heck we're talking about?
What the heck are we talking about? Yes, spoiler alert, obviously. If you haven't seen the film, go watch it before you listen to this. If you haven't seen it for a while, go rewatch it. It bears repeated viewings, to be sure. The Hudsucker Proxy from 1994, as Robert mentioned. It is in the film 1958, soon to be 1959. Corn-fed rural naif, I hope I'm saying that word right, N-I-N-A-I-F, naive person, Norville Barnes, played by Tim Robbins, arrives fresh from Muncie, Indiana, to try to find his fortune in New York City. As it happens, a vacancy has just opened up. The president of the very large, successful Hudsucker Corporation has just committed a spectacularly cinematic suicide, throwing himself through the plate glass window of the swanky boardroom that sits atop the skyscraper. Norville soon replaces him. But wait, you ask, how can a guy who just showed up from Muncie, Indiana, who can't even get a job as a cat's meats man, ascend so quickly the corporate ladder? Well, his first job is in the mailroom, where he's handed a blue letter that he must hand deliver to the top brass. Now that President Waring Hudsucker has removed himself, the man in charge is Sidney Musburger, played by Paul freaking Newman. And Sidney Musburger and the rest of the executive board have a nefarious plan. Needing to depress the stock price so that they can maintain control of the company, they intend to hire an obvious idiot to instill financial panic in the public. It's a conspiracy. But Norville, of course, has no idea of this, because he has no idea of anything, and neither does the rest of the public, except for hotshot reporter Amy Archer, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, who can smell that something is up. To get the scoop, she poses as a helpless country girl in distress, also from Muncie. Norville takes the bait, offers her a meal, a couch to rest on, and in short order a job as his secretary. And now that she's on the inside, she begins filing stories for her paper about just how much of an idiot Norville Barnes really is. This hurts Norville's feelings, even as he finds himself strongly attracted to his secretary, not realizing that she is the big meanie who is saying all these things about him in the press. But he has a trick up his sleeve, an idea for a toy that turns out to be the hula hoop. The wild success of the hula hoop makes it look like Norville knows what he's doing and throws a wrench in Musburger's evil plot. But not for long, as Musburger comes up with an even more evil plot to discredit and destroy Norville. Part of this involves making Amy Archer's secret identity public. It looks like Norville and Amy might be finished. Part of the plan also involves having Norville committed to an insane asylum. It looks like Norville's career, and maybe the man himself, might also be finished. Despondent, Norville goes to his presidential office and contemplates leaping to his death, as many a Frank Capra hero before him has in his time contemplated. Not yet, or not quite ready to die, or maybe just lacking the gumption, he tries to go back inside but slips and falls, apparently about to repeat the fate of his presidential predecessor. But he is saved by some supernatural shenanigans. A quite literal deus ex machina, a mysterious but kind-hearted custodian halts the gears of the gigantic Hudsucker clock, apparently causing time to stop. And just then an angel that looks and talks like Waring Hudsucker, the former president, appears. He gives Norville some reassuring words and some advice. He tells him that the blue letter that Norville still carries, which he completely forgot to deliver, gives all of Waring's stock to the next president of Hudsucker, which of course is Norville. And so Norval is saved, and he becomes the president of the company for real. He and Amy Archer reconcile. Sidney Musburger receives his just desserts, and capitalism as a moral system is vindicated. Which the last part is meant to be ironic because I don't think so, but that is allegedly, apparently what happens. So we'll have to talk about what really happens. Anyway, that in a nutshell is the plot.
And that was a great summary. Thank you for that summary.
So good. So good.
Are you going to argue that Norval Barnes actually jellies up the sidewalk?
He jellies up the sidewalk. That's right. I think that what the Coens are doing here is this is the whole movie is kind of ridiculous. As I said, everything in the movie looks fake, right? There's a sense in which we can't take anything seriously in it. Nonetheless, and this goes to, we're jumping ahead in a way to the philosophical themes, whatever, but appearance reality, as I think Peter mentioned. Nonetheless, we can discern the plausible plot points from the implausible ones. I think what the Coens are doing is they're clearly retelling a number of earlier films, especially It's a Wonderful Life, in which, again, the main character is saved by an angel, essentially. They're taking that aspect of the story.
Committing suicide, right?
Yes, they both begin with a person contemplating suicide. They're very similar films in a lot of their plot structure and so on. I think the Coens are not only teaching us how to read their own films, but also suggesting a way of reading those earlier films like that one, which I think Frank Capra might have been quite amenable to. They're taking some of those already somewhat ridiculous elements, like the idea of an angel saving someone, and playing up the ridiculousness. So, the wearing Hudsucker angel looks so absurd with his goofy wings and the hula hoop for a halo. I mean, come on. And his little harp and stuff, right? There's no way we can take that seriously. What they're saying is, we're giving you the movie ending, but we all know this isn't real. We all know that what really happens is that Norval Barnes ends up on the sidewalk, just like Waring Hudsucker did before him. And so everything that happens from here on out is a fantasy, which, of course, one of the reasons I mentioned Hitchcock earlier is because, so 1958-59, the 2 years that this movie straddles. In 1958, Hitchcock released Vertigo. In 1959, it's North by Northwest. Both of them have endings which are quite unlikely. Both of the endings follow scenes in which a character dangles over a void and there's no apparent way that they could possibly escape. And so in both cases, people have speculated that the endings are simply not really what happened, that in fact the character in question actually fell to their deaths. And what we're seeing afterwards is essentially a hallucination, a fantasy. I think the Coens are aware of this. They're playing with it. They're giving us a fantasy at the end of this film as well, much as I think they did with Raising Arizona, where that was specifically identified as a dream sequence. Here it's not, but we are meant to see through this and not take this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Troy, you're our dark angel.
I'm a dark something.
Could see
angel, I don't know. Maybe with a hula hoop halo, maybe. But I'm a dark something.
We get to the Coen brothers themes. I have a lot to say, of course, in response to that. But I think the ending is really fascinating, this film. And as you know, I've been a Hudsucker hater. And so my first thing to say was I want him to splatter on the sidewalk. And that's maybe what's driving you too. It's your wish fulfillment kind of fantasy. But actually, I've come to see a lot of really serious and interesting philosophical points. But yeah, I'm going to get to that when we get down to the Coen brothers themes. But I love your reading. I think it's great.
Thank you.
Flat.
Let's dive into the political, social, cultural themes. Peter S. Fossil, why don't you start us off with what you see as some of the central political, social, cultural themes?
Let me set up some pins that y'all can knock down then. Use a Lebowski image. All right. Well, first, of course, it's these are Eisenhower years. This is the Cold War, Red Scare, imperialist expansion of the United States, a union struggle post-World War II. There is a very, it's really, first of all, you might say it's pretty shocking that not more of the Cold War appears, but a small reference to the journalists as sort of red sympathizers, where one of the editor chastises one of the journalists for writing about all the gains the Soviet Union's been making in its hectares of corn or whatever it was. Yeah, the second thing is it's just about a period of U.S. Prosperity, consumer capitalism. It's post-war prosperity, right? But it's also odd that there are no veterans or allusions to the war. I mean, this is part of the fantasy dreamlike quality of it is really abstracted from what's actually happened in the US. Although I will say about the war, there are these two evil German scientists, or I don't know if they're both evil, the physicists. Like, why are these two scientists both German? I love the one of the guys like, where you would go into outer space and die like a schwein. I was almost like Doctor Strangelove worthy that moment there. But yeah, those are these two Germans that are here. Um, um, then, of course, this is the period of American dream being realized by young white men, and that the film certainly comments on that. But it's also the beginning in the 50s of the post-war. Of course, you could say the Black freedom struggle has existed since 1619, but there's certainly a kind of leap in it in the mid 50s. And that's where you get the Montgomery bus boycott and the rise of Martin Luther King and all this kind of thing. And so that's happening. And we do have a Black character, problematic Black character, I think, but who shows up and is engaged in a kind of struggle of some kind. It's also the birth of, the modern feminist movement. You could say, usually people will put that around, with Betty Friedan and I don't know, the 1963. It's where the feminist comes out. But someone but was already written, The Second Sex, that comes out in what is it, 49? It's a period of, but if you step back, it's 1994. And of course, this film comes out in 94, the Clinton years and the soaring stock market. So there's a commentary, and I think we should all pick up on this background period of wild, unleashed capitalism that's happening in the United States, not just in 1958 and 9, but here in 1994. And so I think those are some of the background features I see. And yeah, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Hey, Peter, can I ask you a couple questions? So,
Sure.
The troubling aspects of the Black character, are you referring to the kind of magical Negro trope that we...
Yeah, the healing Negro, the magical Negro. You see this so many films. Think of the Black Stallion, a film that I love. There's that character's in there, and so many other places. You've got the healing Negro and the wise old healing Negro, and I think that's troubling trope, but it may be intentional if they want to call attention to that in this film too. But anyway, to me, when I think about this, the political cultural issue, it's the context, right? And so you're looking, the first thing I think about is where's this set and what time period, what place, and then of course, stepping back, what about the film itself? So it's set in the United States just after, it's not just after, but almost a decade after World War II. But it's the Eisenhower era, and at that time, the Cold War is really raging, and we're getting, the Red Scare is really, deeply entrenched.
Well, it's not too long after the Korean conflict.
You are so right. The often neglected, as I just did, the Korean conflict.
Korean conflict, and also, if I remember correctly, that's where Jeffrey Lebowski lost the use of his legs.
You are so right. You make these great horizontal connections, and I love it about that.
I'm very horizontal.
What do you want to make about that? So it's set, at that period. So there's that background of these wars and the imperial expansion. This is the time when Eisenhower had been screwing around in Guatemala, and the Dulles brothers are just wreaking havoc around the world, and the pipe is getting laid for the Vietnam War, which is coming soon, so I think there's a lot of that going on too. But it's set right in Wall Street, and that's the heart of American capitalism, and it's about a bunch of when you see the table, it's a bunch of old white males, and the havoc that they're wreaking, and so on the one hand, it's remarkable that a lot of that political background isn't mentioned, but then on the other hand, he's thinking well, it's there in quiet ways, or at least maybe talking about the background of it. About the racial struggle, so when you see that fight in the end, I thought, now this is a stretch. If Troy's splatter is a little bit of a stretch, this is a little bit of a stretch for me. So that fight between the two characters in the clockwork, the machinery. So first of all, this is the machinery behind it all. Right. And also you see the pipes down in the bottom too, in the mailroom, we know how they do with pipes. We saw that in Barton Fink, and we saw that in Blood Simple. The pipes are this underworld, this place where dark things are happening, struggles are happening. And so they're back there, and it's a fight between a white man and a black man, and it's interestingly the white man's kind of a skinhead. By the way, that was the character who played Pete in Barton Fink, who was kind of, I thought about later, like
That's right. The
yeah,
elevator operator.
the elevator operator, right?
Ah.
And St. Peter's that is there at the gates of hell, but I mean at heaven. But Barton Fink maybe he's at the gates of hell. Anyway, he here is like a dark character, and he's also clearly like in league with the bosses, with the Sidney Musburgers and the exploiters, and the black guys working for I forgot the character's name. It's Aloysius is the white guy's name, and what's the black character?
It's Moses, isn't it?
Moses. You're so right. See, there you go. Moses. He's going to lead his people to out of bondage. He's fighting with with the tool of his sort of subordinated, working class, life, and that is the broom. And so I thought I saw in some of that symbolically like a struggle between two parts of the working class. The one that is going to sustain white supremacy and is working in league with the bosses, and the other, which is the agent of going to be black freedom, and the Moses is going to lead people in the black freedom movement, and is going to liberate people. So it's sort of almost a revolutionary character versus a status quo character, a reactionary character, except that when Moses gives his little speech, and I want to get to that later because it's the stuff about personal identity with Amy that really surfaces, but he starts talking about the importance of capital accumulation around the world, keeping the gears going and all that. But of course, he's the one who stops the gears too, right? So and you wonder, like, you might be right, Troy. There's like some irony, in that little speech about capital accumulation and keeping the wheels of capitalism going. So I'm reading a lot into that struggle there behind the clock face, but that's kind of what came up for me. And I could go on, but I feel like I'm talking too much. So I wanted to see what you guys have to say about it.
Peter, we love to hear you talk. It's awesome. It's great. Talk. Come on. Yeah. Well, let me follow up on a couple things Peter
Well, can
said.
I say something about the feminist movement then too? Because
please.
Tell me what you think. There's this anti-feminist movement because, okay, so clearly there's a reference to His Girl Friday, and with the Amy Archer character. I forget Rosalind Russell's character in His Girl Friday, but it's two female reporters, right? And they're at this kind of transitional moment in their lives. But in His Girl Friday, Hildy is the character's name in His Girl Friday. She realizes herself in the man's world as a reporter, and and rejects Ralph Bellamy's offer to move up to Albany and have babies and live in small town America. Whereas here, the accomplished woman reporter seems to be going in the opposite direction. She resigns her position at the newspaper. She resigns her job at the company, and all we see at the end is that she's going to be partnered with Norval. So I saw that as like an anti-feminist moment there in the film. But of course, here comes the irony from the Dark Angel. I know.
That's right. That's right. Here's what I would say, Peter, and thank you for letting me be the Dark Angel for today. I'm really enjoying this. It's so much fun. It's a delicious role. Here's what I would say. Anti-feminists know for the following reason. Yeah, she does turn out to be a bad character in that sense. She goes in the opposite direction. She gives up everything. She's the only character for a while, at least, other than the clearly evil ones, who really knows what's going on because she's smart enough to figure it out. And yet she ends up being corrupted. She doesn't know herself. Well, she doesn't know. She doesn't have the integrity or the stamina to stand by what she knows. Yeah. She ends up going along with Norville, who clearly is an idiot, and she realizes it. She's right all along. And yet she falls in love with him anyway and abandons all this, her good values, and bends the truth even to pretend like he's okay. So the reason I don't consider it anti-feminist is because it doesn't single her out in any way. Every character in this film, in my view, other than with the possible exception of Moses, and that's a complicated case. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe, Norval in the end essentially betrays even Moses, whose hopes for liberation are going to come for nothing. But we'll talk about that later. But I think every character in this film, even the ones who we feel like we're supposed to be sympathizing with and rooting for, end up being sucked into the system and being corrupted by the end of the film.
I mean, I feel it, Troy, because like one of the things, and I don't want to jump the philosophical theme, but there's this, I think, one of the interesting, by the way, I want to say, first of all, that analogy I was making before, His Girl Friday captures one of the reasons I don't like this film. I think I love Jennifer Jason Leigh in many other roles, but she is no Rosalind Russell. She does not rise to this role, you know. And part of it though is she doesn't have a character like what's his name, Archie Leach.
Cary Grant.
Cary Grant. His real name's Archie Leach.
Right.
But Cary Grant to play off of. You know, Tim Robbins just is no Archie. I mean, no Cary Grant. I forgot the character's name in the film, but anyway, she just does not make it as a Rosalind Russell to me. Rosalind Russell has it all over her. But on the other hand, lots of really philosophically interesting bits with her, Amy Archer, that is, in the sense that it seems like you could argue she's realizing her true self as a Muncie girl. Because at the end, he doesn't know that she's not from Muncie, and that doesn't get revealed. And that's an allusion back to the Lady Eve, I think, where you get this really fascinating ending with the Lady Eve, where Henry Fonda's character, Pale, I forget his name, but he's having an affair with his wife. He doesn't realize it's his wife, but it's his wife. And I mean, first he falls in love with a woman who's presenting a false presentation of herself. Then he finds out her true self, breaks up with her, then falls in love with and marries another false presentation of this woman, and he ends up having an affair with her. And I mean, that's how it closes. But so you're thinking like, well, maybe that is her true self in a way. Like, who is the true self here? What is the conditions under which, you know, their love has been realized? And maybe the false selves were in fact kind of manifestations of the true self. So here, the question is, and I get where the irony goes, either you're going to accept that she's realizing herself as a Muncie girl, and that this is an allegory about, you know, the triumph of Muncie over New York City, or you have to see some kind of irony in that. But she is not reveal herself as not being a Muncie girl at the end. He's still in love with a Muncie girl, but maybe that's who she really is. All right, that's all I have to say.
Or maybe that's how stupid he is.
Or is he an imbecile? But of course, yes. the narrator, Moses, tells us at the end, he rules. That's where, like, I see the Platonism. He rules with intellect and compassion.
We are told that, but other than the invention of the Frisbee, and again, in my view, all this is most likely a fantasy, but other than that, there is no evidence of it. Look, Norville...
Except for the evidence.
Well, no, no, but so, okay, he has two good inventions, a hula hoop and a Frisbee. Yeah, there's something to his credit. Here's the thing about Norville, though, if we're going to talk about whether he's a good ruler or not, and this is part of the reason I do wonder about Moses and his reliability and so on. Yeah. Norville, once he gets out of the mailroom, there's no indication he ever gives a second thought to any of those people. He doesn't do anything, right? When he's president, he does nothing for the people in the mailroom. He doesn't seem, the only person he interacts with is Buzz, the elevator operator, who he's completely mean to. There's no indication whatsoever that he changes anything about that corporation. It's just he's now at the top of it. So I doubt the claim that he is a good ruler. I think that in capitalist terms, and as Peter, as you yourself said, Moses has already talked about the gears of industry and stuff. I think Moses is kind of converted to capitalism too. In capitalist terms, he might be a good ruler. He might lead the company on to great profits and so on. I don't think he's a good person. I don't think he becomes a good person when he takes over the company.
Yeah, but isn't that because you, like me, are leftists? I mean, because isn't this just a story? This is the myth that capitalism presents itself. It's like,
yes,
if you have good rulers, if you have good bosses, it's all good.
Right.
You know, like, remember, like a film that I really detest. We were talking about films like we really hate. One of mine is Pretty Woman, and like there, oh my God, like you really get the compassionate, good.
The hooker with a heart of gold.
Yeah, and then the hooker with a heart of gold. I mean, it's just like it's just wretched. Right. It's an emetic on every level. But I mean, I think either you're right there. It's undermining that, or it's sustaining that. And
it's doing both. But see, the heart is with the undermine. It's giving us the surface that we recognize, and we say, yes, this is fun. We can appreciate and enjoy it in an ironic way. But of course, we see what is lurking down beneath, because they make what's down beneath very visible. I mean, Norville is clearly an idiot. In a way, that the whole premise of this film, the whole core idea of this film, I think, is go back to those movies, again, Frank Capra, various Hollywood films where a sort of a person who seems to be naive and a rube comes into a sophisticated place like New York or whatever, and it reveals in the end that of course he's the smart one and he's the wise one and he's the one, you know, who really knows what's going on. So what if we have a movie like that, except the rube really is a rube? What if he's actually just an idiot? That's what we get, because this is reality. To quote a line from the player, which I think is pertinent here, this is reality, right? And so we see this guy who the movie goes practically out of its way to convince us that he is clearly an idiot, so that we can't, in the end, if we're thinking at all about this, buy into this sort of myth of, oh, this was really a good, smart person all along who, you know, comes to flourish and rule well at the end or whatever. We cannot buy that ending unless we let ourselves be completely unconscious and just go along with the Hollywood ending.
Okay, I'm sympathetic, but I got to give you like the counter push, even though I love your reading. I love your reading. Well, I mean, there's this philosopher out there who wrote this book on like love's vision. I think it's called. It's about the epistemic, you know, game.
Have you been reading that trash again, Peter?
This is Troy's book. And like, you know, Amy Archer sees something in him. I mean, she at first thinks he's a rube, an imbecile, and then she sees something in him. And it's a question of how dynamic you think these characters are. How much of the narrative arc here is education? Her education is to, you know, move from being this mannish, embittered, unhappy professional woman to being a happy, you know, partner to this presumably ultimately wife to this capitalist leader. But his trajectory is from the rube who's arriving like to, you know, the wise leader. Does he have an education or not? Does he gain or not? And does she see something when she says she's in love with him, and she sees what a swell, even there I see the irony, right? A swell guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like,
because we don't see much of anything. Robert, what do you think? I'm really curious. You haven't weighed in on this very much.
Yeah, Robert, let's get back to Robert. Sorry.
Well, no, all I was thinking is, I think that he is a rube, but here's the thing. He does come up with the hula hoop and the frisbee. So it's not just once in his life. He twice somehow hatches these ideas that, again, it's not like a great achievement of you know, it's not a great example of human achievement to invent the you know, the frisbee and the hula hoop, but is he that, or maybe only a rube would come up with the hula hoop? So the point is,
it's kind of a stupid toy, I have to admit.
it's stupid in a genius kind of a way. I mean, how many people have looked at round objects throughout history, and then this guy says, "Hey, it can be a kid's toy." So I'm not going to go so far as to say he's like what's that movie we all hate with Tom Hanks?
You've Got Mail?
No, the one where
Sleepless
he's
in
like,
Seattle.
He's a rube, but he's not really a rube.
Forrest Gump.
Oh yeah, what's the
Forrest Gump, of course.
Forrest Gump. I hate that movie.
Right. Terrible.
So I'm not going to go so far. You know, I think that the implication of Forrest Gump is that he has some kind of like deep wisdom, and you know, but you know, I'm not convinced that he's fully a rube.
You're right about the hula hoop. The frisbee, again, you know, on my preferred reading, that's part of the fantasy ending that never actually happens anyway. So he doesn't really invent the frisbee, but we can, you know, take that or leave it. That's another matter. The hula hoop, we have to give him credit for. I think that frisbee aside, at least, that's the one thing he does in the entire film that shows that he has any ability. But he's clearly not competent in any way. He again, is not a good person. He doesn't care about the people in the mailroom or anything like that. He doesn't try to change things at all. He doesn't do he's mean to a lot of people. As soon as he becomes successful, his true colors are revealed. He's just clearly a terrible person who all he ever wanted was to succeed in capitalist terms, and he does. And then also, if we think about how he got there, right? Why does he succeed? I mean, in every single step along the way, he succeeds either because of his idiocy and his incompetence, or at least at one point through sheer luck that has nothing to do with it one way or the other. So he gets the blue letter, which takes him to the top. He forgets to deliver the blue letter because he's so stupid, which is the key to his ultimate salvation. That's because of his incompetence. He gets the blue letter to begin with because he's so slow. While everyone else around him is hiding, he doesn't manage to hide, so he gets stuck with the letter. He gets chosen as the president of the company because he's obviously stupid, and Paul Newman sees it. Every step along, and then the success of the hula hoop, even, which I grant you, he's a schmo. He's the patsy here. He's the guy they can just push around, as Musburger says. The hula hoop, okay, grant him in some way, that's creative, but even that still is a matter of luck as far as success goes, because in that whole sequence with the hula hoop, we see it was on the verge of failure. It's only because one hula hoop happened to find one magical kid that the thing even succeeded. Otherwise, it would have disappeared and never been heard from again. So
I love
even his
that kid,
great
by the way.
success, the
Kid
kid
great.
is amazing.
The kid, they should do a whole movie on that kid.
The spin-off with the kid, I would watch that. Totally. Yeah, that whole hula hoop sequence, I think, is a work of genius. And that kid
Raimi
is just-
directed that sequence.
I know, he did. That's right. That was directed by Sam Raimi, yes. And man, what a great piece of work that is. The film within a film. That you could just show that on its own. I think it's incredible. But anyway, that's his great success. Even that was on the verge of failure. It's only because of a coin toss. It's only because of sheer luck that succeeded. Every other step that he made was purely by virtue of his incompetence.
I mean, every product has luck that way, right?
That's right. So the whole idea of a meritocracy we should question, right? But this kind of film that they're critiquing is based on the idea of a meritocracy, that in the end, even though it looks like the guy's going to fail, in the end he'll succeed because he's smart and he's capable and he's a good person.
And he's a good person. That's what you're missing there. Virtue. He's got that Muncie virtue.
I don't think they see that as virtue. I
they
think,
don't.
No, right. Yeah. I think they want to critique that too. That's
the
silly
Coens.
story.
Yeah, I see the Coens. Yeah.
Well, this is, I had mentioned earlier that part of what the film is about is the myth of meritocracy, because as you mentioned, he becomes a success because of his failure. And there's a sense in which his failure to deliver the letter, right? So it's the failure that leads to his success.
But remember, here's interesting you said that, because I'm just going to, this will reinforce your point of view. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's the second letter. It's the letter that the angel reads. And that's where he talks about failing. So he has to fall to rise. He has to fail to succeed. And so anyway, there's the other.
We should come back to that. There's some very interesting stuff going on with falling and verticality in this film and so on. And and that language of that letter. So we should come back to that. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say that I haven't really thought this through, because I'm listening to you, Troy, and my nascent contrarianism is, so I'm thinking the straight read is that he's a total moron. And he goes up and he forgets, as you said, he forgets to deliver the blue letter. But here's something else he does that I have to tell you, I have to give him credit for this. He's obviously delivering this letter. The secretary's fainting, screaming. People are freaking out. He walks into the most intimidating CEO's office in movie history. And he's got the chutzpah to go, hey, before I give you that letter, this is an idea that I've been carrying with me for a long time. So
I agree.
So this is his moment. He seizes the moment when he's before Musburger. Most people, I personally would go, here's the letter. Sorry, I even exist. And, so that's always surprised me. Like, wow, he actually has the chutzpah to hand him this thing out of his shoe that he's been carrying around.
Musburger keeps telling him to leave. Get out. He doesn't get out. Even the thing's on fire. Musburger says, I'll take care of it. No, he's going to take care of it.
Yeah.
And only because he's so stupid.
Insistence
this is all. I mean, chutzpah is a completely capitalist virtue. The most aggressive, abrasive people are the ones that succeed because they get the attention. I mean, and they ignore other people. Right? Yes, that's right. Yes.
Well, I mean,
I think all this fits perfectly. And let me remind you, by the way, that when he's in Musburger's office, he hears the plot on the phone. Musburger's talking to someone and says to him, we need to find an idiot. No, that guy's not stupid enough, and so on. And the fact that he doesn't put it together when Musburger starts saying to him, oh, you graduate from college, people think you're a jerk, right? The fact that he can't put the stuff together and realize what's going on and is oblivious enough to think that when Musburger makes him president of the company on the first day, that somehow that makes sense and he deserves it. He's a grade A moron. He's he only succeeds in every way because he's just so stupid. That's my contention. I'm putting it out there.
You're just a Muncie hater, aren't you?
No, I don't think that in every context, chutzpah is necessarily a tool of capitalist, imperialism. I think there are cases in which, there's cases, we don't have to call it chutzpah. We can say he had courage. There are cases in which that situation requires courage. But putting that aside, I do think that, in general, your read is the read I think that the Coens want you to have. And I do want to circle back if we can, because we haven't really even Troy, you haven't even had a chance to really lay out your political, social, cultural themes.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Do
Can I
you
make
want
another
to-
correction, by the way? I said the Korean War ended in 55. It's 53. I'm embarrassed to say that.
Ended
I
in
gotta
53.
Correct
Well,
myself. Yeah.
Good to know. I mean, did it really end then? When did it
I know.
end?
Well,
when
it's
does the
never
war
ended.
end?
It's never ended.
Right.
So, okay,
Right.
so-
So that's, a lot of flexibility there.
What do you
I think
Troy?
a lot of what I've had to say has come out in the ensuing discussion. So maybe I will ask this question, and this relates to something Peter asked at one point about where the movie is set and when is it set. I mean, officially we know it is set in 1958-59. It's very explicit about that. It tells us in the opening moments. And again, this is a film very much about the metaphysical nature of time in some way or other, so it's not surprising in a sense. But of course, and a lot of people who've written the film pointed this out, it doesn't look like the late 50s, right? Most of the art design and stuff looks like the 30s.
It's earlier,
and the
yeah.
films that it's drawing on and going back to, again, are these classic American Hollywood films from the 30s and early 40s in some cases. So there's an interesting playing with time going on in this film about time. And it is set in a New York, which, for that reason, among others, is not supposed to look like the real New York or feel like the real New York. And we've mentioned earlier, how artificial the sets look, even as they also look amazing. Like everything looks kind of fake and artificial in some way. Everything, again, as I said earlier, is ironic and we're detached from it. Everything is in quotes, including the acting of the people, which is why, Peter, I think that maybe I rate Jennifer Jason Leigh and Tim Robbins' performance higher than you do. Tim Robbins, I think, is perfect. Both of them are playing cartoon characters to some degree. They're not supposed to be Cary Grant. They're supposed to be a sort of a hollow version of those characters. Yeah.
Hey, wait, let me just say, when Tim Robbins walks into that office to deliver the blue letter, that's his physical that's brilliant. The way he walks, or
and even his
meanders
stuff in the
around.
mailroom, like when they're delivering the blue letter and he's stuck out in the aisle, he can't get out of the way. He doesn't know what to do with his body.
They're going to dock you.
You're gonna we got to talk about that scene. That's amazing. His
but
physical
I
comedy in this
disagree.
film,
I just couldn't laugh. I thought it was. It didn't.
I
work
thought it
for
was
me.
brilliant.
His
I
little
thought it was so
ambling
funny.
around that office.
And I'm more with Troy. I think that Jennifer Jason Leigh does an amazing job. And I think it's not a coincidence that Tim Robbins, he resembles in a lot of ways his physique and the way they make him up. He resembles the skinny Jimmy Stewart characters, from the Frank Capra films. That kind of, the big pants and the tiny,
Yeah.
So
Mr. Deeds and all that.
He does.
Mr. Deeds, by the way, is really important. You were talking about his girl Friday as one of the templates for the Amy Archer character, but the plot really closely resembles Mr. Deeds, where there is a woman in that, right? Jean Arthur plays the woman who I think is a reporter and pretends not to be, and they fall in love, etc.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
very closely aligned in terms of plot with that film.
Yeah.
Even
there's a lot. Go ahead, Robert.
I was just saying, even in Mr. Deeds, when she meets him, the way that the way that they have Jennifer Jason Leigh in the diner, and she tells her sob story, and she passes out, and we get the two cabbies. That's in Deeds. It's a very similar thing. She walks past him. She faints. She has this whole hard luck.
And Lady
story.
Eve. It's a similar thing in Lady Eve too.
But the Coens, of course, do this interesting thing of distancing us from it by, in fact, providing a commentary. They have these two guys telling us. So
I love that.
What an old gag this is. What an old ploy. She's not going to do that, is she? That's such a cliche. Like, oh, she's doing it. That guy's got whiskers on it.
I thought it established the connection with the Lady Eve because she's a con woman. And by the way, I also thought she's just Jennifer Jason Leigh's just no Barbara Stanwyck. She's just although
nobody's Barbara Stanwyck.
Nobody's done Barbara Stanwyck.
That's an unfair. That's like saying Robert's no Donald Davidson. I mean, come on. Okay.
All right.
Jeez.
Sorry, Robert.
I think part of that, I saw the two cabbies, they're like running commentary. We are watching the film, and the Coen brothers are presuming that the viewers have seen all the films that they have seen. And so I took that as we, the viewers, are supposed to be thinking, oh yeah, the Coens are playing off of this trope, and that's like a meta commentary, because we're watching it going, oh yeah, this has been done a million times. But the Coen brothers know it's been done a million times, and they're doing it on purpose to play off
Yes.
That's where I saw the cabbies.
Absolutely. No, it's a very self-aware thing. And of course, we know the Coen brothers love narration. We've talked about this before. They do it in this film too, with intro narration and outro narration. But this is a way of narrating the film within the film with different narrators, focusing on these other characters who are just watching this thing happen and play it out, and vocalizing a lot of our thoughts as we're watching it.
And how does it end? I mean, just to confirm your reading, Troy, what do they ask for at the end?
Bromo.
Well, yeah, because because they're like, yeah,
right. Perfect, right?
Right? Yeah, that was great.
So good. I guess we touched on this. I want to go back to this. Relates to maybe a couple different things that have come up and that Peter said, but the mailroom again, the critique of corporate culture, and in particular the treatment of the people down at the bottom, and quite literally down at the bottom. The metaphors here of verticality and so on, up and down, going up to the top, rising to the top, succeeding, right, being stuck at the bottom, falling and failing, as Peter mentioned, and all that, are made very literal in this film. Although, of course, part of what's interesting about that is when you think about how literal they are in real life, because not only do people talk this way and use this discourse, but in fact, if you go into a skyscraper that is some corporate headquarters, the executives are going to be up at the top, right? We actually do this in life. So for whatever reason, we have made this very literal in our culture. And so it's become something more than just a metaphor, but it's a metaphor that's so natural to us that it's second nature. And so I think there's more to be said about that in another connection that we'll come back to. But the mailroom, again, just first of all, the visual design, the set design of the mailroom, the whole mailroom sequences are just astonishing, I think. Robert, you mentioned Brazil earlier, which I think is a good connection. Metropolis is another one that bears some resemblance to this. This gets back, I think, to Peter's point about the absence of political context and all the stuff that isn't mentioned. This film is in such a bubble. And I think this is very intentional. All of the characters in this film live in a bubble. The executives do. They live in their little corporate world. Tim Robbins does, because, again, he's an idiot and he doesn't know anything about the world. Amy Archer surely is aware of some of the stuff going on because she's a reporter, but she doesn't bring it in. It doesn't come in any way. But one of the ways to see what a bubble this film is in, and I think this is related to the anxiety here about creeping capitalism and about capitalism sort of taking over everything. I've remarked earlier on how in every Coen film up to this point, but not this one, there is some sort of a scene of home invasion. There isn't in this one, but the reason is you don't see anybody in their home. You don't see anybody in a private residence. The only interiors in the film, if I'm not mistaken, are all businesses. They're all either the Hudsucker building itself, which is where the majority of the film really takes place, or in a coffee shop or a cafe, right? Something like that. You don't see anybody's house. You don't get any real sense that any of these people have any life, a private life that is disconnected from their professional life. Whether that's the professional life of an executive with all of its privilege, or the very unpleasant professional life, so to speak, of a schlub working in the mailroom who will never get out of there. Who will, think about that old guy who's been there for decades. Within 47 years or something like that. And he says, next year, I'll get promoted to parcels. If I'm
that was
lucky,
a key moment, I think,
says.
because Norville is coming from management school. He wants to be in management. But right there, he's with the working class, and it's well established by that character. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So this guy has no hope. If he even gets promoted to parcels, it'll be through luck. Again, Norville gives no sign of caring or even really listening to him. He doesn't see. He's just trying to get out of there himself, which he's sure he will, because he's got the idea for the hula hoop in his pocket. So no sign of empathy or compassion from Norville. But the whole mailroom, and somebody mentioned briefly the orientation scene, which I think is just a little masterpiece. They do this, they dock you. Do that, they dock you. That was your employee. Not this is your employee number. Get ready for it. But that was your employee number. You can't get your paycheck without it. It will not be repeated. It's one of the most brilliant moments. Like, why wouldn't you repeat it? What possibly is served by that? Everything. That's like this part of the movie in a nutshell. What's that? Yeah, it's completely Kafkaesque. It makes no sense. All of these bureaucratic regulations and ridiculous. I love that. I think it's beautiful. But yeah, it gives you a sense again how stifling this is and how all-encompassing it is. Like, this is these people's lives. They have nothing else. You imagine them waking up and go to work. I recently watched Joe versus the Volcano, and the first few minutes of that have some similar things going on, actually. This is their whole life. There's nothing else, and they're treated like crap.
And remember what
Musburger
says,
treated like crap.
They're little people. They don't matter. You can do it, fire them, whatever you want. We don't really care.
That's clearly their attitude. That's right. And I mean, what's amazing about Norville is how quickly he assumes that attitude as soon as he becomes one of them. But
Well, he says he's getting rid of the dead wood. That's what he says.
dead wood. That's right. He starts to use the metaphors of corporate speak, stuff like that. The dead wood.
That's antithesis. That's antithesis Norville there.
Yes.
But,
and one more quick indication of the all-encompassing nature of this, of course, the idea of Hudsucker time. They have their own time, right? They control the universe. That wearing Hudsucker, merged with the infinite at 30 seconds past the hour Hudsucker time. I think that's pretty incredible. Yeah,
that's
that
great.
really should. And because this is a company that can stop and start time as it wants, right? Moses does it later on. Paul Newman sort of does it with the executive toy that's going back and forth. And when he says, "Wait a minute," it freezes. Right? They have the power. That's why he's got that big clock. They have the power to start and stop time, which of course is a metaphor for the way that corporations control the time, the lives of their employees.
Nice. Well, Troy, that's a perfect segue for I had written under my political, social, cultural theme. I just had one and a half. The first thing I wanted to say is with regard to the setting of the film, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's set in 1959, right? This is the year preceding the decade when the American ideals are going to be crashed, obliterated with the 60s counterculture. So I think this is, it's an homage it's a saying goodbye to that world because, the next decade is going to be tumultuous. But my central political, social, cultural theme does have to do with time and capitalism. And in fact, I was reading for this in preparing. There's a book out there. The guy, I don't know who he is. His name is Jonathan Martineau. He has a book called Time, Capitalism and Alienation, a socio-historical inquiry into the making of modern time. It's from 2015. And some of the things, because I started thinking about this notion of time and clocks, of course, from watching the film. And there's a lot of tie-ins. So a couple of things that come to mind, dovetailing on what you were saying, Troy, is that the notion of time as presented by the invention of the mechanical clock, what he refers to in the book as clock time, what you and I just refer to as time because we're in the thick of it. But this doesn't originate until the 14th century, sometime in Europe, monasteries and stuff like that. But the idea of there being a clock that is mechanical, this leads to this capitalist notion of work time, labor time, right? If you think about labor, the ideology of clock time and labor time and capitalist time, even when we think about socialists and we think about unions and labor, one of the big grievances or one of the big pushbacks is always to get higher wages, more wages per hour. So still caught in the paradigm of the capitalist clock time, right? So it's not even breaking out saying, hey, we don't need to be monitored in this way, right? So the kind of the capitalist employers had an interest. And I'm not saying there's like a causal, but it's more of like the invention of the mechanical clock. It's like a petri dish for this aspect of capitalism, which is the interest in a more precise time measurement to control and discipline wage labor, right? So you have the notion of wage labor. How much do you make per hour? When you get a job, what's the pay? How much per hour? That whole notion, that whole ideology is something we're steeped in. So the clock time is this kind of hegemonic form of time. It's affected our business life. It's affected our social life. It's affected the way that we think culturally. And so what I wanted to say on that aspect is that when they say Hudsucker time is just capitalist time, which is just our clock time. That's an invention it's a mechanical invention, and it so envelops and so it runs our lives in so many ways. And I think part of the commentary I see when they say, as you mentioned, like that's Hudsucker time, time just is capitalist time. So they're basically everyone there is enslaved to this kind of dictatorial chronometer in some way, but we are also enslaved to the dictatorial chronometer. And it's when you think about it as a vestige of capitalism, or at least a tool of capitalism. I don't know what the alternative is. Maybe it's too late, but it does rub me the wrong way to think so much of my life revolves around the precision of time, and as professors, what time the class meets and what time it ends, and how many hours I put in my office hour. Right? This is all manifestations of capitalist control of labor. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that time plays a central role in a film about a critique of capitalism, dark representation.
Let me know what you think about this, Robert. I mean, I totally agree with you. By the way, on the first day of my classes, I always tell them, since I observe the quarter hour and explain its medieval background, I'm saying, like, we don't have to begin exactly on time. We're not driven by that clock. Because I know that work, and there's precedent work to that too. And I agree. The regimentation of time is really an impressive capitalist thing. But the second thing for you, who does interrupt it though? It's a working class black guy who's able to interrupt that relentless, oppressive procession. And I think that's an interesting symbol with a tool of his working class work. I think.
Great.
Of course.
As he says,
technically, he's not supposed to do that.
Of course. Well, who's forbidden? It reminds me of, the anarchist thing. You might remember this, Robert, as a Philadelphia boy, but remember there used to be a bookstore in Philly called Wooden Shoe Books. But that comes from, it was an anarchist bookstore, and comes from the name, it's a French word for a wooden shoe called a sabot. It's where sabotage comes from. And what the workers would do in the 19th century, they were in these textile mills with all this machinery cranking, and they wanted a break. They wanted some relief from the oppressive churn of the mill, and they would throw wooden shoes into the machine and break it so that they could have some time off. And that's where the word sabotage comes from.
That is awesome.
Isn't it?
I love it. Wow.
Yeah. And that's what Moses does, in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know what the teeth thing symbolizes, though. It's like he's defanged capitalism.
His bark is worse than his bite. I don't know. We'll think about that. But
yeah.
he does. You're right. Although, again, Moses can only pause time. Eventually, it has to start up again.
Right.
So, yeah. But still, it's a gesture in that direction. And I like this very much.
And you know what else I just came to mind when you said that, Peter, is, it is, as I mentioned, it's 1959, and it's before the counterculture, the explosion of the counterculture. But the metaphor on the Berkeley steps of Mario Savio, right? Sometimes you must throw yourself upon the gears, when he gives that famous, inspiring speech at the Berkeley.
You're so right.
The imagery of the workers. I think he says, like, when the machine becomes so corrupt, the only way to stop it is to throw yourself upon the gears. I think there's that kind of metaphor with the broom.
I have one more observation I'd love to get your response to, because I couldn't quite puzzle this one out, and it's a feminist thing. The bar she likes to go to is called Anne's 40. Well, I just trying to figure that out. But it turns out there was like the Ur lesbian bar in San Francisco I forget.
I thought it was called Anne's 440. Is it 40 or 440?
But 440.
Yeah,
but
440.
It was called Mona's 440 in San Francisco. And I wondered if there was an allusion to that. I don't know, but
there's got to be.
That's
440. Yeah, there's got to be.
Yeah.
That's
well,
really
I have to tell you that Erica Rowell, who wrote the Brothers Grimm,
that very fine book, on the Coens,
She has an interpretation of Anne's 440, the Beatnik Bar. She says that Amy Archer's role is a harmonizer in the universe of the Hudsucker, and this she wears the letter A on her dress, right? And she says, well, A is the musical note for the string. When you're as a musician, you tune up to A440. That's the note. That's
what?
The note.
Wow.
That's
Really?
the note
Oh,
the
my
orchestra the orchestra tunes up to. Everyone plays an A440, and so she says that that represents Amy's role as bringing harmony to the universe of
that's so
Hudsucker.
good.
So
That is
thank
so
you,
good.
Erica, for that. That was
Awesome. Love it.
Well, that's about it for my. I think it's time to move into the philosophical. Good thing there are no philosophical themes in this film. Who wants to jump in here on the philosophical themes?
So we've already touched on some, obviously. The question of whether and to what degree this film is a critique of capitalism, for instance, I've been pushing it as very much a critique of capitalism, largely based on the idea that it takes place in an unjust universe. And Robert, you also have mentioned this in Connect with Meritocracy and so on. So this is a philosophical theme, and a big Coen Brothers theme. They keep coming back to this. Is the universe just or not? In this case, partly, is the capitalist system just or not? But it's broader than that, too, because, of course, they mention even larger conception of justice. They mention karma, for instance, or karma, as Tim Robbins pronounces it, which is wonderful. The idea that what goes around comes around and you'll be rewarded or punished for your actions and so on, which, again...
and a cyclical thing.
Yeah, and a cyclical, so back to that cyclical conception of time, etc. Many of these characters seem to believe in something like that. And yet, if we look at this universe as depicted, it's not true at all. The bad characters generally don't suffer, although Sidney Musburger at the end does, if we buy what I take to be the fantasy ending. The good characters don't succeed because they're good. In fact, on my view, again, there really aren't any good characters. So success and failure is basically determined by luck and chance more than anything else, and then the willingness to be aggressive and exploit others and the opportunity to do so, or something like that. So this seems to me a very unjust universe. I've gone over the ways already, I don't need to rehearse them, in which Norville succeeds precisely because of all of his defects and his incompetence and his stupidity and so on. There are a few remarks about this. I mentioned the old guy in the mailroom again, saying he'll be promoted next year if he's lucky. There's also, of course, the moment where Buzz, the elevator operator, as Norville's getting off the elevator to deliver the blue letter, says, "Good luck, buddy. You're going to need it." Which, in this universe, everybody needs good luck. That's the only thing that gets you ahead. So I think Buzz is voicing an important truth here in that moment. So there's some interesting stuff going on with justice and injustice. And of course, as always with the Coens, there's connections with free will and chance and the role of chance. This, again, seems to me to be a universe in which chance determines almost everything that happens. You do not get the sense that the people at the top of that building sitting around that board of executive, the big long table, are there because they've worked for it. Maybe the exception is Waring Hudsucker. His story is somewhat complicated. We don't really know enough to make that judgment, or it's hard to know what to make of him, in fact. Certainly his initial act, his suicide, is a bit of a mystery, and we get a kind of an explanation at the end, but again, I'm not sure we should buy it. I'm not sure that's even really coming from him. It's this fantasized angel. I don't know what to make of that. Waring aside is a complicated case. People don't seem to succeed or fail in this universe because of their efforts or their intelligence or their intrinsic virtue or anything like that. It's luck and chance that seems to govern almost everything. You do get sort of, and again, I take it this is part of the fantasy reading that I don't think we should buy into heavily, but these supernatural entities intervening at times, especially at the end of the film, to steer things in a certain direction or something like that. And there's other moments too of that early on when Norville is looking at the newspaper and he puts his coffee cup down and it makes the circle. And we need to talk more about circles, but the circle around the Hudsucker ad, the only job that comes up for him that says no experience required, which he then, and the newspaper sort of chases him down the street. So not only has the universe circled that ad for him, the newspaper chases him and finally forces him to notice. So there are hints from the very beginning too. And even the presence of Moses at the beginning as narrator, sort of, the Coens helping themselves to this sort of supernatural level. Now, again, as I've said, I'm very skeptical about all this because I think they're harkening back to films like It's a Wonderful Life and so on, where you also have this weird supernatural framework. And I think they're saying to us, don't take this stuff seriously in our film. And in fact, don't even take it seriously in It's a Wonderful Life. Anybody who watches It's a Wonderful Life carefully knows that no angel shows up at the end and Jimmy Stewart, of course, kills himself. That's the real ending of It's a Wonderful Life. I think that's what the Coens are partly saying to us with this. But anyway, there's some gestures in the other direction, admittedly. As I see it, though, this is largely a chaotic universe where luck and chance reign, as far as free will and chance and so on go.
But even, the hula hoop, there's a supernatural aspect.
That too. That's true. It seems to seek the kid out. You're right. But again, these things are portrayed in such a ridiculous way that we cannot take them seriously. We cannot believe that this actually happened. We know this is just movie magic, right? The Coens, they want it both ways. They want us to have our movie magic, we enjoy it, we take pleasure in it, and so on. They also want us to scoff at it and say, that's just movie magic. That has nothing to do with the real world. And this whole film is filmed in such a way that it feels like it has nothing to do with the real world.
I mean, but doesn't theater and cinema, I mean, this is getting a little philosophical, but I mean, it lives.
Don't do that, Peter. Don't get philosophical in the philosophy of the Coen Brothers podcast.
Maybe, Stanley Cavell's book, The World Viewed, about the ontology of film. And it's this, but he talks about theater too. And it's like, when we see Desdemona being murdered up there, we know it's not real, and yet we're not indifferent. Nobody charges the stage to stop him. Although there is isn't there a great film where that does happen? Anyway,
I'm sure there is, but
but on the other hand, it's so the theater and cinema, the ontology of these objects is kind of in the middle there. It's like they're not realistic, but they're not realistic either.
Yes,
and
I completely acknowledge. See, let me lay my cards on the table. Here's what I really think about the Coen Brothers. What you're saying is true. The Coen Brothers know it. They have a tremendous anxiety about this. And this anxiety, we've already seen it to some degree, especially in Barton Fink, but it really surfaces here. It's predominant in Fargo. I think it's in pretty much every one of their films from now on. This tremendous anxiety about the fact that they are working in a medium that they know by nature misleads people by telling stories and by being magical. And they're trying to find a way around that and of undermining that while at the same time doing it. That's what they're doing, I think, with every one of their films from now on.
Okay.
There you go. That's what I like it. Yeah.
Hey, Troy, going back on your philosophical theme of, and we've talked about this a bit here, but I want to say more. I want to hear more about it. And that is the film as a critique of capitalism, as a critique of American capitalism. And as I had said earlier in my brief opening statement, which we're obviously at odds about, I never took the Coen brothers as really being, they're kind of like center left, right? So to see this as a critique of capitalism and to say, well, I mean, what happens in the end and what happens in a lot of Frank Capra films is that you don't get this message that, the system of capitalism is evil and it's corrupt and it needs to be crashed. What you get is, there's evil capitalists like, Mr. Potter, and then there's good capitalists like George Bailey. And really what you need just good people doing capitalism the right way. And so at the end of the film, right, that's the message we get, which is, look, Norville's a good capitalist and he's a virtuous capitalist. And it seems like your read is, no, this entire thing is a ironic repudiation of capitalism. If you can say more about that.
I mean, I think the comparison I want to make here is with a film that also stars Tim Robbins that came out 2 years earlier, The Player, which I know you recently rewatched. We're familiar with, Yeah, The Player is a wonderful, wonderful film, one of Robert Altman's best films. And again, another one of Tim Robbins' best performances for sure. The Player also does something similar in a way where it sets up a movie with all of the Hollywood conventions. And of course, The Player does something interesting. It tips us off to this by having a movie within a movie with the Hollywood convention. So The Player is the story in part of the creation of this film within the film. We see how at first this film within the film is going to be a work of artistic integrity, but then gets corrupted by the nature of the industry and the needs of capitalism and so on, the needs for profit, so that even the filmmakers who at first, seem to have so much integrity and were so insistent on telling a real story with a bleak ending, etc., give in and allow it to be rewritten to tell a completely ridiculous story. That sort of story is what tips us off to the fact that when we then see the allegedly happy ending of The Player, we're not supposed to buy that either. Because with the last image, if I recall correctly, is of Tim Robbins coming home to his wife. I assume they're married at this point. I'm not for sure, but she's definitely pregnant with his child. Right. It's a white picket fence. It looks wonderful. The music, and the music is very, very important to this. They had Thomas Newman, I think, right, the composer of this film. Mm-hmm. Wonderful score. The music here swells. It's triumphant. It makes you feel good. And yet there is this sinister undertone to it as well. And you feel like, oh, the movie machinery is manipulating me into feeling good about this because the protagonist of the film has triumphed. He's going to get away with it. He's going to be happy. There's a kid coming along. It's wonderful American Hollywood success story. And yet there's a little part of your brain saying, but this guy's a cold-blooded murderer and he's awful. This is not a happy ending. Even though it looks like a happy ending, it sounds like a happy ending, it feels like a happy ending, it's not. And I think something similar is going on. To me, this is what I feel at the end of the Hudsucker Proxy. Now, Hudsucker Proxy is complicated because, again, to me, there's these there's three different ways of reading the ending. I mean, I'm sure there's more. But for me, there's three different ways of reading it, all of which has something to it. There's, first of all, the literal ending, where he triumphs at the end. Moses tells us he has a long and successful reign and he does a good job, etc. There's the non-literal ending I've been pushing where, in fact, he dies because no angel shows up to save him and he just jellies up the sidewalk, and that's really the end of the story. But then maybe he has the fantasy as he's about to hit the earth of this going on and him having this wonderful reign as president of the company, etc. And then there's the third reading, according to which the events actually happen as depicted, that he is saved, he does become the president, but it's not a happy ending because he's just as bad as the presidents before him. So it goes back to the linear time, cyclical time thing again. It's not linear time. It's not progress. Nothing's gotten better. He has just assumed this position that was vacated by the previous president. He has immediately become like all those other people. He's going to be just like them. Nothing's going to change. In the eyes of people who have bought into the system and bought into those values, they will see this as a happy ending because the company's doing well. But for anyone who can stand back and detach themselves, and remember again how much the Coens throughout this entire film are pushing us to detach. They're pushing us away. They're saying, don't take this literally. These are not real people. They don't act like real people. They don't look like real people. This obviously would never happen. It's a cartoon, right? They're pushing it. It's like this Bertolt Brecht kind of strategy, I think, of creating a detachment so that we don't feel the normal emotional identification with the protagonist. And instead, we're thinking about it intellectually. And from that level, we realize Norval Barnes is an asshole. He's a terrible person. There's almost no sign throughout the entire film that he's a good person. And yeah, Amy Archer seems to eventually come around to the view that he's a good person, but that's because there's something wrong with her too. She's giving into capitalist and masculinist ideology and saying, oh, he must be wonderful, right? He's charming, and so on.
Peter, I'm so curious to hear if you think this is an anti-capitalist film or if it's mildly anti-capitalist.
I basically have your reading that this is a liberal kind of film. But the question is, I think it's meant to expose the excesses of the 90s with the stock market, gung-ho, and the 80s and its detachment. It's sort of cold, there's a reason why George Bush ended up talking about like compassionate capitalism, because that was the response from the center of American capitalism to the excesses of the 80s and 90s. And so I guess I'm basically on that, but I love Troy's reading too, and I'm sucked into it. Here, I did want I'm the kind of person, because they do the skepticism, I'm like, I like that read. How else could I reinforce that reading? And one is we'll touch on the cinematic stuff later, but so it does depend on how you read that fall. So that is Norville's fall. Is it a fall from his old self into a new self, which is what I think the film looks like, and I think you do have the theme with Amy Archer too. You've got to lose the old self to become the new self, and it's part of the build-up of it. But there's a signifier that suggests it's maybe a fantasy or dream, and that's the appearance of Glinda the Good Witch, who comes down as the angel. When the angel comes down, it's exactly like the Wizard of Oz, the little bubble that is it Belinda or Glinda? I forget her name. It's Glinda, right?
I feel like it's Glinda the Good Witch, but I could be
Glinda
wrong.
the Good Witch.
Glinda with a G, yeah.
She comes down, and it signifies you've entered some kind of weird fantasy world now, maybe, but I read it as an allegory, and of course, like these films, everybody knows these are not real. Everybody knows they're allegories. Everybody knows they're theater. And
I disagree with. I think a lot of people believe these films, Peter. I think a lot of people out there believe the American myth that if you work hard, you'll succeed, right? And that's what these films are giving us. Even from people like Frank Capra, who are very intelligent people in some ways, trying to undermine it or at least modulate it, they're still giving us a version of that, and people buy it.
I mean, I think you're equivocating, though. They don't believe that there's really an angel on the screen, but they do believe the myth that's getting presented. I agree with that.
Okay, yeah.
So,
but I think the myth and the angel are tied together. And, consult, recent polls on how many Americans actually believe in angels. It's a pretty high number.
yeah, it's true. Exactly.
Yeah.
I was about to say that earlier, actually. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but I mean, in that angel in particular, like they know it's an allegory. They know it's a symbol. They know it's a fiction. They know it's
it is meant to be. That's right. But then we're supposed to read backwards, I think, into earlier films like It's a Wonderful Life and say, well, that angel wasn't real either. But if the angel's not real, the ending doesn't happen. And if that ending doesn't happen, Jimmy Stewart dies.
That's why I was like sustaining, like,
Yeah. Just like Jimmy Stewart dies at the beginning of Vertigo, and Grace Kelly dies at the end of North by Northwest. I mean, it's a cool
reading. It's a cool reading. But the other thing, though, in opposition to that reading, though, I did want to first reinforce it. And then we don't know that he's going to be as bad. In fact, all the signifiers suggest he's not. So, for instance, the letter that the angel reads, what we find there, and there's a Coen theme that I think that stretches for many of their films, and that's a nihilism. Where's the nihilism here? Well, it's capitalism, because clearly, like, it begins with this guy who succeeded totally in capitalism. He's like on top of the world. We just heard that report. I love the way that guy delivers a report, by the way.
He's awesome.
We are loaded, and that's when he jumps. He's hit the peak. And this isn't like Mishima at the top of his game or something like that, or some bodybuilder wants to go out and place glory. He's at his peak and he's realized it's empty. It's nihilistic. There's nothing there. And, he might as well just end it all. Whereas when he reads the letter, you realize, like, he starts crying because he had lost his beloved, to, of all people, Sidney Musburger, right? We find out in that ballroom scene that, his girlfriend or beloved has he lost her. Just, it's like Scrooge. Yeah. This is like there's a Dickens,
and they're not even happy. Musburger doesn't even appreciate her.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So
it is tragic.
There's no hope for love with people like them. But I mean, the signifier of the Mona's Anne's 440 is that, yeah, this couple is going to be happy, but they've acquired what Hudsucker did not have, and that is something beyond, a source of meaning beyond capitalism, and that's the divine, if you take the angels seriously, or at least the classic Hollywood thing of love conquers all kind of thing, which is schmaltzy. But the signifiers suggest they've got more than Hudsucker had. They've got something new, and then Moses confirms, saying, like, he ruled with compassion and intellect. I don't know. That's the count.
I cannot see the Coen brothers going in for a love conquers all ending. I just can't do it.
Well, it's an homage. It's an homage. They're just homaging.
But they don't ever. They are homaging, but I don't think they ever just homage. I think they also want to do something with that homage. I
feel that. I get you.
They're making a comment on film history, I think.
Yeah, I get you.
Well, I feel your interpretation is certainly available. It's certainly there. I'm not going to deny it's there.
I like the splat because the way he like rolls into that snow, it's like, yeah, that was a pretty good roll, dude.
Oh yeah. Isn't it though?
Like parkour. He did a little parkour there.
Hey, a very tiny, very quick correction. Actually, Grace Kelly is not in North by Northwest. That was Eva Marie Saint.
Thank you. Oh my God. I spoke in the heat of the moment, and we
must correct ourselves.
That's worse than misidentifying a seagull. I gotta say. That's one kind of error. At least we won't have to wait for a month to fix that one. Thank you, Robert.
Peter, do you want to jump in with some philosophical things?
Self-knowledge and personal identity. I think it's interesting when Moses, first meets Amy Archer in the clockwork there. And that clockwork space is just so interesting, isn't it? First of all, there's two doors into it. One from the president's office and one from Musburger's office, or whatever, he is vice president, I guess. And but then it plummets down because we see Aloysius plummet. And is that the guy who falls the 45 floors, by the way? I mentioned at the end, but
that's another story, Peter.
Yeah, how far has he fallen? At any rate, she meets Moses there. He always seems to be there. It's in the middle of the night, he's there. Yeah. And he tells her that she doesn't know herself, that she thinks she's happy, but she's not. And it disturbs her. And also in that scene, wretched as you can read it on anti-feminist grounds, like when Norville, is talking about her, but he doesn't know he's talking about her. He's talking about this imagined Amy Archer who's written about him, and how she's probably a bitter, dried up old maid who, likes to hang out with the men, but is really unhappy. And it pierces her. It really, it really does strike her as it rings true. So Moses and Barnes have touched on something there with her. And she changes over the course of time, things, and becomes, at the end, she signals with the little hand gestures. She becomes a Muncie girl. And that's that change in personal identity, I think, is interesting here. And what counts as the self? So what I'm suggesting is the true self can emerge out of a false self. And what's that mean? The true self was not Amy Archer. That was another false self. So we get the false self of Amy Archer, and then the false self of the that is Amy Archer, the Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, and the false self of did she call herself Amy Archer when she was a secretary? I doubt she used her own name.
No, she had a different name. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember her name there, but that's a false self that becomes the true self kind of thing. And so I wanted to suggest that selves are mutable in this film, and they depend upon narrative, and they depend upon context, and they depend upon, insights about virtue, really. And so the self gets reformed there. Those the two things. There's a skepticism about others connected to it, in the sense of, does Norville really know her at the end? If you want to read another kind of cynical reading at the end, he's in love with this woman who's lied to him and still is lying to him, or at least he still doesn't have the goods on her entirely. Yeah. So does that suggest it'll fall apart once he does? Then the last philosophical theme I wanted to talk about is head and heart, because we've talked about that before. That's really getting the Coen brothers themes. And remember, the editor says our front page has to have heart. And,
that's what sells papers.
He's Norville's identified as both compassionate and intellect at the end. So there's head and heart in that. Anyway, that's all. Yeah.
That is nice. I like this bit about him not knowing who she is even at the end, as she is still lying and so on. It connects for me with something from the very beginning of the film, which is when he's looking at all the jobs on the job board and realizes he can't apply to any of them because all of them say experience required. And we learn from this he has no experience. Now, of course, when philosophers talk about experience, they're talking about our experience of the world and being in contact with reality. So the idea of Norville having no experience, in obviously the common sense way of, being an inexperienced, naive person, but also I think in this deeper philosophical sense that he's not in touch with reality, as we see over and over again. I think there are ways in which Norville is very much like Barton Fink, who is also in his own head and not really in touch with reality, or in touch to a questionable extent. And I think that thing about Amy at the end, really reinforces that. There's a lot of parallels between Norville's story and Barton Fink, of course. Nice. If we think of two people coming to the big city to try to make it as, make a career as, in a way, a kind of creator for both of them. They both have interactions with the powers that be, who at first appear friendly, but they're actually plotting against them, right? If you look at the two plot lines, very similar in a lot of very interesting ways, I think. Which is another one of the things that makes me think that even though on the surface they look and feel so different, these two films are very much about a lot of the same things, including deep down appearance reality, philosophical skepticism, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it gets the challenge of appearance reality, and which is, by the way, to go to that meta level too, film and the world outside of the film, And can you asked the question at the beginning, can film portray the truth? And I was suggesting somehow the truth can come out of the deception, the truth can emerge out of the lie. In fact, or the deception can become the truth, or something like that.
Right,
and that's what I thought maybe was happening with Amy here.
Nice.
Yeah. I was also, going back to the theme of having an affair with your own wife, and that this reappears. I was thinking about, remember that Jimmy Stewart film called The Shop Around the Corner?
Oh, yeah. Yes,
no,
lovely
I haven't
film.
Seen that. No.
Oh, it's great. It's Ernst Lubitsch.
Really good. Yeah.
They remade it allegedly as You've Got Mail. They remade it a couple times, but the most recent was You've Got Mail, which is a moral aberration, which we should probably talk about someday. But anyway, as bad as Forrest Gump, if not worse, in my view.
That'll be on our films we hate episode.
Great. That'll be fun.
But The Shop Around the Corner, it is a lovely film. Anyway, I wanted to just talk about a couple of quick very, very quick philosophical, because you guys covered everything. I'm not going to repeat, but I had one thing was of course, what popped to mind to me with Moses as the kind of like the stand-in for God. I mean, he's omniscient. He knows everything. And I was thinking about, the good old teleological argument for the existence of God. Moses is like the watchmaker, right? The William Paley argument.
That's great. I love it.
So I
Nice.
kind of thought, yeah, he's the fact that we have the God figure in control of time and we have the giant gears and so that whole, and for those, I should probably clarify for people who don't know, there is this argument, a famous argument in philosophy. I think I always credit it to William Paley, some British
I think that's right.
clergyman. It's basically says, look, the universe, if you observe the universe, if you just make an inference and look at the universe with the way the planets, everything fits together in this kind of way that there's no way this could come about by pure chance, in the same way that if you found a watch on a trail and you opened it up and it had these gears, you would never say something like, oh, the watch just came together as a natural artifact of nature. And so likewise, by analogy, when you look at the universe is very similar to the intricate workings of a clock or a watch. And in the same way that watches have watchmakers, universes have universe makers, and God is therefore God. And so I think that that theme is kind of plays out a little bit in the film. So I was trying, this might be a stretch, but it's a philosophy podcast, so it's okay to stretch. Hey, I was thinking about I was trying to make a connection in my brain about the notion of time as it's presented in the film, and the kind of the slogan or the theme of the future is now. The future, and I was thinking about that.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. And time.
Here's what I came up with. In the philosophy of time, there are various theories, but one of them is this doctrine called eternalism, or sometimes four-dimensionalism, right? Eternalism is a philosophical approach to the ontological, the true nature of time. And if you're an eternalist, what you think is that all points in time are actually real, right? As opposed to what they call like presentism, which is intuitively we think, the thing that's real is the thing that's present. So you would say like dinosaurs were real, but they don't exist, so there's no dinosaurs now, right? And what the eternalist says is, no, actually, reality has this other dimension of time built into it, right? And so then I started thinking, there is actually a philosophical way to read the future is now. Of course, we know what they mean in the film by the future is now. It's as saying, Hudsucker is on the cutting edge and in the future, right? But what I was trying to think of, so if you're like we are, you're regular people, you think, well, Venus exists. It's over there, right? It's not in my particular area of space, but it exists over there. But dinosaurs, they don't exist. And if you're an eternalist, you can say, no, in the same way that since time is part of what it is to be real, is time's built into, temporality is built into it, then in the same way that a distant object like Venus exists now when I'm here pointing to it, events in the world, in history, they're already there as well, in the same way that when you point to the planet. So here's my read on that is, if you are like Moses, if you are an eternalist, let's say, and you have this ability to look outside, to be outside this, to look and say, oh yeah, time is actually built into what it is to be real, then you can look and say, yeah, of course the future is now. There it is right there. I'm looking at it and it's real, right? So there's an eternalist way to read the relation of time in which the statement, the future is now, actually makes sense literally, philosophically, if you buy eternalism. Now, do you buy eternalism? Well, that's a tough one. But anyway, there you go.
I love it, Robert. I love it. I want to pick up on it a little bit, and I want to propose not a competing interpretation, I think, but an alternative one that's meant to be parallel in a way. I love it, first of all, because it connects again with the idea of time as circular and the idea of the circle, which is such an important central metaphor for this film, because it there's something circular about that version of time. Again, every moment is sort of repeating always. It's always, it is very much a rejection in some sense of the linear progression where we're moving forward through time, as common sense would seem to suggest. So I think there's something very right about that. I like the selection about Moses, although it is interesting that at the beginning in his opening narration, I think he says something like, he's looking at Norville up on the ledge and he says, is he going to jump? What's going to happen? I don't know. He says, right, the future, who knows what's going to happen? But the past is another story. And then we go back into the past, which is a very strange thing for him to say. And that's always kind of struck me, to wonder why. I do have a theory about why he says that's another story, which we should come back to. But both his opening narration and his closing narration end with those words, that's another story. So I want to mention that before we go. But this thing about time and eternalism and this phrase, the future is now. So, okay, bear with me. I'm thinking about the early scene. It is the scene maybe where that phrase is displayed most prominently. It's the Waring Hudsucker suicide scene. And the place we see that, of course, is right after he hits the pavement, which we don't actually see, but we see the screaming woman, then the camera pans up, and then it sort of fades into, very quickly into a shot of Musburger looking down. But he's up there close to the clock, and we see the clock saying the future is now. I want to think about this scene, because that scene, of course, the whole sequence with Waring Hudsucker committing suicide is intercut with the scene of Norville Barnes entering to apply for the job. It cuts back and forth between this a couple times. And what I realized one time when I was watching this was, if you think of their two moments together, they make a circle. Because Waring starts, in his chair where Norville's going to end up, gets up on the table, runs across the table through the window, heads down, hits the pavement essentially where just a few moments ago Norville was standing. Norville, of course, walks into the building, which at some point Waring had to do in order to get up where he was.
Through a revolving door.
Through a revolving door, another little circle within a bigger circle. That's right. Isn't that wonderful? Through the revolving door into the building, very quickly moves up the elevator to the top floor and becomes president. So if you think about their two paths together, it makes a circle. And of course, Norville ends up sitting in the chair and occupying the office, et cetera, where Waring had been. So when I think about the future is now in connection with this, the circle and so on, but then there's also this linear time aspect to it. I'm thinking again about Musburger standing there looking down on Waring's body jellying up the pavement. What's the future? Well, the future is death, right? Eventually, our future is all the same. It's all death. The future is now becomes a very sinister statement. It's saying essentially we're all already dead. The future is now is really creepy, right? And Musburger looking down at what has happened to Waring Hudsucker is also, especially on my reading where Norville also ends up on the sidewalk, he's looking at Norville's future as well. He's seeing it in that moment. He's seeing the future that was lying in store for Waring Hudsucker, but he's also seeing Norville's future because that's where Norville's going to end up. The two of them are making this tight circle. Norville feels like he's making progress by entering into that building and applying for this job and all this. He's just entering this endless cycle that he's just a tiny part of. The rat race that Moses mentions at the beginning. And that cycle is basically going to chew him up and then spit him out, just like it did with Waring, just like it does with everybody. So I think there's a very, again, I'm being the dark guy here, this is a very dark and sort of sinister reading of the future is now, which I suppose on some level, thinking ahead to other Coen films, you can't stop what's coming, right, is the line that comes to mind. And so the whole Hudsucker Corporation is built on this, slogan, which sounds optimistic, progressive, and so on. It's cheering. The future is now. That's great. But it was John Maynard Keynes, right? The famous line about long-term thinking. You think far enough, long-term far enough, we're all dead, right? Yeah. I mean, there's something to that, right? Yeah. So I think there's this really sinister aspect going on here as well, which is connected with the circular view and connected with the circle that these two characters make.
You reminded me something, both of you, but Robert, in your thing about presentism or perdurantism, I think they call it in the technical thing, is that the past and future both exist, as well as the present. Augustine's onto that, if you believe into this, but he thinks for God everything is present. So God is not in the process of time. God's like the Platonic forms are outside of time, which is where Norville kind of steps, or when Moses stops the clock there. But one of the things about that that is related as much as you can get from a human being is for Augustine, you can only understand really the truth of your life. And for him, it's about God's, working through his life, but still the truth of your life by looking at the past through memory. And that's a weird thing about this film to me was that, and I never, you figured it out for me, because the thing is, it begins with this thing about like the future is now, but then what Moses says at the beginning is, but the past, and then the whole film is about the past. The whole film is just this recollection of 1958, and the only time you jump into the future or the present is at the very end there. But almost all of the film is about the past, and it's in the past where we see how the self grows and changes and becomes where it is. But the future, that's something we have knowledge about now. But this is where like Troy's and my readings can depart, is that the future we can only imagine. We don't know the future. I mean, God might know it, but the past is something that we have access to in terms of at least self-understanding. And that's where the whole film is about until that very end. So yeah, I was always wondering, this is a film about the future and about the now, but the whole film is in the past. So what's that about?
As far as I can tell, it's the only Coen Brothers film that almost entirely is a flashback. I couldn't think of any other.
Yeah.
I think this is actually what I was just about to say. Inside Llewyn Davis is also structured the same way. It begins with a scene which we don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So Hudsucker Proxy identifies this scene as essentially in the future and tells us we're going back. Inside Llewyn Davis makes us figure that out. But it begins with the ending, and then we go through the previous week to get up to that ending. And what's interesting about that connection to me is that, again, critique of capitalism or whatever, and justice of the world and so on. The Hudsucker Proxy is about an untalented, in my reading, an untalented, unintelligent, bad person who succeeds anyway. Inside Llewyn Davis is about a talented, good person, worthy person who fails despite everything.
Nice.
They're the inverse of each other, and both of them show how unfair the world is. And they both have a circular structure, which I think is very interesting. Oh, and of course, thinking about circles and metaphors and so on, you got the hula hoop and the frisbee and so on. What do you have in Inside Llewyn Davis? You have records spinning around and around in place, right? Another circular icon. So
don't forget the guy in the alley too, who said like, out with the old, in with the new. But
oh my God, that's
like,
right. That's wonderful, fantastic. Yeah,
it's the turn of Fortuna's wheel or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the future is now, and the turn of the year. So yeah, that's great.
And Troy, I was thinking about your saying the future is death, but there, as you mentioned, there's the theme of the circle of rebirth, and so in the film, it's not clear that the future means that the future is death, because as he points out when he's talking to Amy, he says like, you used to be an antelope, and I used to all this stuff, right? So.
As the Hindus and the beatniks believe, yes.
It's a great scene.
There's a different read on the future is now that doesn't involve death, but involves all of these future incarnations. It's circular, right? So
no, I agree.
A little less dark on that reading.
Yes. I think all these readings are here. I think the Coens are playing with a lot of ambiguity. And one of the things they're doing, for instance, with the whole movie and with even that phrase, like you got this phrase on the surface, it looks nice, it feels good. And that reading of it is real. But then you think about it, you realize there's also, if you think about linear time rather than circular time, it has a very dark, sinister reading. That reading is real too. So I think there's a lot of intentional ambiguity in this film and in all their films. So yeah, when I push my preferred readings, as I do, I'm not saying that's clearly the right one and certainly not the only one. I think there's a lot of ways of taking this. And I think they're largely aware of a lot of these interpretations. Yeah. But I want to explore as many of them as I can.
You just unlocked another thing for me, Robert. I love that scene. I just took it, for comedy. I'm the Ibex or whatever, But what they're talking about is the past lives, right? And comedies of remarriage, as Cavell points out, are often about, just to let go of the past and future stuff there, but they're about the male figure bringing the female figure into the dream, or they're creating with her a dream. So, for instance, It Happened One Night, Clark Gable talks to Claudette Colbert about this vision of going out to the island and being out under the stars and all that, and then he carries her literally across this waterway with stars, and so he's like carrying her into his dream. And here in that talk, he's calling upon this imagined past to bring her into this, context of, you can just see her falling for him through this kind of appeal to an imaginary past where they shared they were eating the grass together and all that. And by the way, that's the only time, as I wondered, Troy, you were talking about like being in rooms. Many of the comedies of marriage have and not just them, but you can go back to Shakespeare too, where a moment where the couple goes into a green world, where like it's going to Connecticut back in
Yes, Connecticut, the green world. I love that.
Connecticut, the green world in The Awful Truth, or Bringing Up Baby, or these films.
Yeah.
They're going into the woods at night, and just like in Midsummer's Night's Dream, and that's what he does there. He takes her into the green world, and that's where they're able to.
That's right. That's
connect.
great. Yeah, and, that's a great observation. Yeah,
excellent.
I love it.
But it's a past too, and it's an imaginary past. Rather than a vision of a future they might have together, it's an imaginary past.
Yeah.
That's fictive because they're not animals, and yet it functions in that same way, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And juxtapose that with the end of Raising Arizona, which is a pure projection of a possible future of their living happily ever after with their grandchildren.
Yeah, it's great.
And that does kind of confirm Troy's thing, because you were talking about before. Moses in the beginning says we don't know the future, but then in the end, he tells us about the future. So which is it?
Which is it? Yeah, even Moses isn't consistent.
So, fellas, what do you say we move into the Coen brothers themes for the Hudsucker Proxy?
Let's do.
Let's do. Robert, you got something? You want to get us started?
I can get us started. Let's see. Okay, here's my question. I always throw this out there in these contexts for you guys. Is Norville Barnes a sympathetic character? I know we talked about this with Barton Fink.
I think you know my take on that already. I love him as a character in a movie. He's incredibly entertaining. He's very funny. As a human being, he's a piece of crap. He's terrible. So sympathetic, no.
Peter, what do you think?
I just love the delivery, and also reflecting on how like we each have like our characters that we hate. They don't line up all the time, but there's something about it. Some of these Coen Brothers characters that just elicits a strong reaction. I mean, I liked him okay. I thought that he was a Midwestern, kind of a simple guy from the Midwest, and but that he did have his virtues, and as he was, forgiving of Amy Archer in the beginning, and he understood the shareholders, but his flaws, which lead to the evil that Troy's onto, is, I mean, he just buys into the capitalist thing, and he buys into the American myth of like the good capitalist and meritocracy and all that sort of thing. And so I agree with that, but he still comes off as a swell guy on a personal level anyway. His politics, I mean, that's way a lot of Americans are. There's a lot of Americans, certainly here in the Midwest where I live, that are wonderful people. But some of their politics, not so wonderful, and their blind faith in American capitalism also a little bit. Although that seems to be on the wane. But anyway, you know what I'm saying.
Well, when we talked about the same issue with Barton Fink, and Troy, you said he's a very flawed but sympathetic character. And,
I know we're on the opposite sides this way. So I didn't like Barton Fink.
Yeah, I think that Norville Barnes he's an imbecile, but I have to say, you said he's a total piece of crap. I'm going to say, I can't go there with you. There are parts in the film especially when he has his epiphany, his so-called epiphany, when he realizes that he's been a jerk and laying all the people off, and he finds love with Amy. There's a part of me that wants him to be okay. There's a part of me where like I don't want bad things to happen to Norville. So if we're talking about the pure affect, I found myself going, okay, well, I think it's a good thing if Norville is happy in the end. But
I think there were moments where I also felt that. Not a lot, but there were moments here and there when he did tug at my heartstrings a little bit. But I also felt, Peter, this is your head and heart sort of metaphor here. I felt like my heart was saying, yeah, he's an okay guy. And my head was saying, don't listen to your heart. Don't listen to your heart. That it's misleading you. That's what Amy Archer's doing. That's why she's going to end up in a bad way. Listen to your head. Your head is telling you this guy, he's no good. So now there is an issue here. There's a deep issue, of course. A lot of what makes him a bad person, if he is a bad person, is stupidity and ignorance. Are people responsible for that? That's a hard question, actually. I mean, he's probably not mostly responsible for that. That's just the way he is. So I think, I don't think we'll get deeply into this, but there are some interesting questions. If we went the Hannah Arendt way or whatever, right, about banality of evil type thing, he might be a true Eichmann type person. Put him in a position of power, he'll do terrible things, not out of any sort of malevolence, because I don't really think there's a malevolent bone in his body, but because he's ignorant and doesn't know what he's doing and just doesn't know any better. So maybe that's the kind of wickedness that we're talking about.
I don't want to conflate his idiocy with his vice as a person. So I think going with Peter, I think there's parts of Norville that I think are virtuous. But Peter, can you help me out here?
Well, I mean, I would reaffirm that. I will say there's a moment in the film that, was perplexing to me or caught me. And I was thinking either it's bad writing or there's something going on here. And that is just the alacrity with which he becomes bad, bad Norval, signaled by like the way, when he fires, the elevator operator guy. And, I love the way they did the parallelism of the guy coming in, making the presentation just like he did. And then, but the way he reacts, then you're thinking like, what? This is just so out of character for Norville. And it's been too quick of a transition. Like, I want to say like, here's what they're doing. He's been corrupted now by success and by Zsa Zsa and all the attention, et cetera. And yet it seems kind of precipitous, although a lot of things in screwball comedies are precipitous, really. But on the other hand, the thought is like, it's quick and it's easy because that's who he is. It's not a corruption. It's
Wow.
or change. It's a revelation of his true self.
I think that's right. We wanted to see him a different way, but we had very little evidence for that. And the truth then becomes very apparent. And I think this is, again, part of the Coen's strategy in this case for showing us that, for making it really impossible for us to approve of him and like him and to see the allegedly happy ending as an actual happy ending. They're showing us not only how stupid and ignorant he is, but how awful he is. He's just not a good person. They're giving us all the evidence. They're laying it out in front of us. They push it so hard, right? They're starting again with a sort of a, Frank Capra kind of thing, or Preston Sturges to some degree, in some, and it's saying, yeah, look, this Rube becomes, but he's really good, right? But he's not good. They make it very clear in scenes like you're alluding to. He's just not good. We had him wrong because we brought these Hollywood assumptions to him and tried to interpret him that way. We were just wrong. He's just kind of an awful person, actually.
But then he falls, and the question for me is like, does he gain something, in terms of character development and through that fall after being punched in the nose, and chased down the street, and et cetera, and fired? Like, and is that something where he?
I'd like to think so. I don't see a lot of evidence for it, but but I get what you're saying.
That seems to be the implication, is when he has that epiphany, when he survives, again, going back to It's a Wonderful Life, there does seem to be a kind of transformation. It's not a full transformation, but I think the implication is he comes to realize what's important. Yeah. And having the big-breasted model girlfriend, all that, no, that's not who he is, right?
Yeah, I think that would be the implication in an ordinary Hollywood film. I think in this film that is taking those films to task and saying, don't believe that crap. That's not the implication we're supposed to draw, but that's my view.
Can we talk about head and heart? I think that's a really common theme that we've identified in a lot of their movies. How do you think that plays out here?
I think on the level that we've just been talking about, in a way, that they're really exploring and pushing the way in which narratives like this can appeal to the heart, that they're structured to do so, the music, the way they're filmed, everything about them, that the mechanics of movie making, again, that movie magic that appeals to us emotionally and gets us to feel things and even think things that intellectually we really shouldn't, and we should know that we shouldn't. And they're pushing that at us, in my view, in this film. They're trying to, and then they're pushing us away emotionally, largely. There are those moments where he's kind of sympathetic and so on, but for the most part, critics complained, right? When the movie came out, so many critics said, oh, they're so distant from their characters, they're so cold, etc. Of course, that's what the movie's doing. That's what it's all about. This is intentional. This is the intentional strategy of the film. They don't want us to identify with it. They're trying to get us not to identify with him as the protagonist that we root for, because they're trying to get us to see that, that's often a mistake, and we have to think about what we're doing and not just appeal to the heart.
Yeah, you mentioned Brecht before, and that made sense to me, actually. But, I'd present a simple model, which I'm not saying is any better. I love your read, but it's just there's a kind of Hegelian thing here. You got the thesis of Norval Barnes, who's all heart and no head. You got Musburger, who's all head and no heart. And then after the dialectical interaction between them, you get a synthesis at the end, which is the compassionate and the guy who rules. He's the new ruler with compassion and intellect, and so that's kind of the.
I like that one.
And there was a little maybe. See, you asked a really great question, Robert, at the end of Village Crossing. Like you were suggesting, Tom also had that kind of gain.
Yes.
And I was wondering, and that's you could say you have the same wonder here, like, but is that gain really there? Like, does Tom really come to a better self-understanding? Does Norville really come to become a wise, ruler, or is this, is there something ironic and not quite? It doesn't go that way as Troy suggests. I don't know.
Hard to know. Since it's the end of the movie, we don't know what happens next. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
A couple of things. So we talked about, Mike, as I posed it to you, was, is Norville a sympathetic character? So we're in the Coen brothers themes. I want to go through just a few themes, and then I want to raise another question that you can run with. But another Coen brothers theme is the movie within a movie that we saw in Raising Arizona. The first 10 or 11 minutes of Raising Arizona is it in itself. It's just a self-contained film. And I think that little montage that Sam Raimi shot from the hula hoop gets okayed to the kid, that kid doing the hula hoop with his neck and everything. That's just so brilliant. So it's another, the Coens sometimes, and we see this also in A Serious Man, where we have he goes to the dentist. Yeah, you're right. So they do this, they drop these brilliant films. Like if you just, Troy, or Peter, if you just said, hey, I made this film, and it was a little 5-minute film about that production of the hula hoop, I would go, it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's genius. It's my favorite part of this whole movie. I think it's perfect. There's so many funny things in it. There's so many visually entertaining and imaginative things in it. I think that kid, I mean, in a movie full of extraordinary images and all, he's incredible. Where'd they find that kid? But all of their films, I mean, they're masters of images, which is one of the things that makes them such incredible filmmakers. All their films have incredible images. This one may be more so than average, but my favorite image of the film, I think, is that kid with that hula hoop. I mean, there's just something so extraordinary about that.
It's amazing.
It really is,
Yeah.
I love the way he moves his hands.
His hand and the look on his face is so serious. It's like, this is what I was born to do, man. This is it. Yeah. And all the other kids can see it. They see it in him and they're like, oh my God, this is magic. We need to have one of those so we can be that guy. It's an incredible moment. Yep.
You know what else? Maybe, I could be projecting onto, the Coen universe, but the Coen brothers seem to be able to find actors who look like they're from another time. And I don't know exactly what that is. And that kid is, man, he just like
the Bathing Beauty and Barton Fink. I thought she was just like out of a time machine.
Good point. That's another good. Yeah, they must have a time machine. That's what it feels like, right? Like if I was watching, one of the Spanky and Our Gang things, and this kid showed up in it, I'd be like, yeah, he fits in, right? Nothing wrong there.
Absolutely perfect.
He really is.
Also says some of this like slightly strange looks, like or voices. Like I remember when Norville was being surrounded by the mob after after the elevator guy punched him in the nose, still wearing his cap. I love how he keeps on wearing his cap. And there's just a woman who says, "Isn't that Wall Street fraud guy?" I was like, what kind of accent is that? That is so bizarre.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's funny.
They really get that stuff right.
Okay, let me just go a few quickies. Let's see. So the montage, and then the dream to me is very presages. It's very Lebowski-esque when he's doing this dance with Maud, kind of foreshadows that kind of dream sequence. And so the Coens love dream, as we said, they just love dream. I'm not going to say every film has a dream sequence. I don't know if No Country does, but it's they're prolific dream sequence.
Well, No Country has the described dream sequence at the end. Tommy Lee Jones describes his dreams to us. Yeah. Interesting variation on the dream sequence.
I thought that wearing Hudsucker's his angel wings and all that, presaging against Buster Scruggs, the way that he looks with the feathers. And remember when Buster Scruggs flies off? It's a very similar look.
Yes.
I love that.
Oh, they literally have wings and a halo. It's like,
Yeah.
so that's
It's a
little
fad.
thing. It's a fad. And okay, last thing I wanted to, and this is a question. And I know Troy he's going to have something to say, but Coen Brothers themes, the voiceover, especially the opening voiceovers that we get, with the number of films, Blood Simple. But I said to Troy the following thing. I said, this voiceover with Moses at the start of the film, it's the lamest voiceover. It's, the prescription of show, don't tell. And I was like, why is he telling us? We don't need to have someone go, New York City. It's the kind of voiceover that you're not supposed to do, which the Coens never do. How do you respond to my criticism?
I think I'm more forgiving of it. I can see your point, certainly. I think in a way it may serve a different purpose in the sense that it's introducing us to a character who is going to play a pivotal role later on, but we don't know yet. And it's a long time before we realize who this character is. And he needs to come across as somebody who is sort of omniscient in a sense, because he is this weirdly supernatural being, sort of outside of the action, who's later going to choose to enter into the action. And it's, for this thing to work, it's got to feel somewhat inappropriate or surprising and jarring even when he does that. So they need a way of getting him in there and of showing that he is somehow disconnected from the action, which of course making him the narrator of the film does. I do also think, though I agree with you, that a lot of what he says is fairly obvious. I mean, we don't know for sure. Maybe it's New York City, because the model, could be any large city. It doesn't necessarily look like New York specifically.
I thought you see the Chrysler. You see the Chrysler building?
Do you? I don't know. Does it look that much like New York City? I'm picturing it in my mind. I don't know. I'd have to go look again. I'm not sure. But, we have to know it's 1958. It's New Year's Eve, about to be 1959. This is all useful information. You're right. They could have found a way to communicate it without having it narrated. But of course, this narration also does fit the function, or fulfill the function of that all of the opening narrations or monologues, whatever, every Coen film up to now has had one in some form or other. Sometimes they're external to the film, as this one. Sometimes they're internal to the film, like Miller's Crossing and Barton Fink. But in every case, they are introducing us to the main plots, the main themes. And so this guy, for instance, talks about time. He says a lot about time. He says, he's talking about the people in the ballroom celebrating the New Year's Eve, people in Times Square waiting for the ball to drop, how they want to grab on that moment, right? They want that moment of the sort of peak experience. This is it. And then, as he says, but of course, as soon as they say it, by that point, it's already passed, right? There's this great thought about time in there that I think is really central to the film and what's going on. This idea of the time as something that we are all trying to capture, that by its nature can't be captured. That's by its very nature. There's no such thing as a still moment, right? I think that's important. I also think it's I'm trying to think of what else he said. I know there's something I'm forgetting, but here's something that I think is very important. And again, both the opening narration and the closing narration end with the same words, which is, that's another story. Now, why would that be so prominent? Well, as I've said, I think more than anything, this is a film about storytelling. And then what they're doing, as I've expounded at some length, I think by this point, is they're critiquing this mode of storytelling. They're trying to make us wary of the dangers of storytelling. They're giving us a classic Hollywood story, and at the same time undermining it and saying, don't believe stories like this. You got to watch out for this. It's about fiction and truth. And so what's the last words of this film? That's another story. What are the first words of their next film? This is a true story. Right? This is a bridge to Fargo. This is where they go next. This is why I feel like, I think of this as the truth trilogy, right? Barton Fink, Hudsucker Proxy, Fargo. All three of these are very much about the nature of storytelling and its relation to truth, how hard it is to tell a true story, what that even means. The head versus the heart again, right? Our deep desire to believe certain sorts of stories, even though maybe we shouldn't because they're not true or they're not likely to be true. I think all three films are very much about this. And as I've suggested earlier, I think going forward, all other films are about this to some degree, but these three films are almost so focused on it, it's almost obsessive. This is the central concern, which is easy to miss because these three films are so different from one another. I mean, what could be more different than the Hudsucker Proxy and Fargo? The experience of watching them so different. And yet at the core, I think they're about the same thing. They're about truth and storytelling and the way we get confused by the media, the way we get confused by myth, right? All this stuff. So now I don't know that when they wrote this, especially since, the story is they wrote this like when they were making Blood Simple. So did they know at that point they were going to do Fargo and start it with the words, "This is a true story"? I doubt it. But in some way, I think this becomes a bridge to the next film that they do, which on the surface looks very, very different. And I think deep down is very much about the same things.
Troy, how do you feel about there are no guns fired in Hudsucker?
I know. I've got this nice theory of guns in the Coen brothers films that whenever a character fires a gun, we see their true character and nature. And it doesn't happen here. There's no guns. So what do you do? I don't know. I've been thinking about that. There's no guns and there's almost no cars, which is also very unusual for a Coen brothers film. So it's interesting. I mean, if nothing else, it signals how different in some ways this film is from the stuff that they've done before. And certainly the absence of guns says something about, I mean, it's not a film entirely without violence. And as I've been suggesting, one particular form of violence, namely self-directed violence, suicide, is very central to this film. Nevertheless, violence seems to play a very different role in this film than in other films. It is still, interestingly, a film about crime in a sense, because this, what these executives are doing really is a kind of crime. It's criminal activity. And it is, I guess this goes back to what we were saying earlier about how insular this world is and how it's its own little self-contained reality, with no other, all acknowledgement of larger global issues, et cetera. It's also essentially, as far as we can tell, a world without any government or without any law, right? The as far as we can tell, the only laws and rules and stuff are the stuff that come from the Hudsucker Corporation itself. So these guys seem to be just sort of running the universe, essentially. I mean, the only people there to oppose them at all are the journalists who might write stories about them and try to expose the truth. But they basically seem to be their own universe. So they are criminals in this interesting sense, but they're almost, again, criminals who are above the law. And I think that's important in the Coen universe because a lot of real crime in the real world is of that nature. It's important that we see some of that. So it's good to have a film that's centered on that, I think, even if it's dealing with it in what is on the surface, at least a very ostensibly comic manner.
I think those are interesting observations. I want to say about the voiceover in the beginning. Yeah, I was thinking, first of all, I thought like, the Lebowski's like that. I mean, introduce the city. It's very much about Los Angeles. To introduce the character, we get to know about, how lazy he is and all the kinds of things. On the other hand, what I think that opening does is establish something about genre, because it says something like it's a Western, right? Or this is about Westerns. And I'm not sure that's the case here. Although what's odd about the film, I mean, the opening is, so you got a cowboy doing the Big Lebowski voiceover in the beginning. Here you have a black man. What does that say? We're getting a story from a black man about these white capitalists. But on the other hand, already we haven't seen it yet, but the way the metaphysical comments, the knowledge of the sort of omniscience about the narrator, excuse me, at the beginning. I mean, it also signals it's a kind of fable, I suppose, but has a kind of divine omniscience, almost a quasi-divine omniscience, and that is, I think, interesting about it. And that was the second thing you were saying, Troy, about
the absence of government in the law.
Oh yeah, government. Okay, yeah. So I think the law shows up in one bizarre, strange way. It's the will. So, but it's a blue letter. It's not really a will, is it?
It's not clear it's an official legal document, though it clearly has binding
true.
force, but maybe because it's from one of the Hudsucker executives, of course it would in their world.
Right. That's right. It's not really a will. It's within and even it's the bylaws that, are dictating. So the bylaws are very clear.
Right. Companies' bylaws. That's right.
And we don't hear about the state laws. So maybe the letter, it's a blue letter. Why is blue? I don't know. But yeah, you're right. I thought at first that was like an appeal to the law there, but it's really not.
There is a contract. There's the Bumstead contract. So it's like this is the closest we get to the law in this universe, the sort of agreements that capitalists make with each other.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there doesn't seem to be anything.
Well, I did want to say that. So there is this suggestion of something quasi-divine with the angels and with Moses and all that. But who's got? Oh, I didn't think about that. That was Moses's staff. Remember, Moses has a staff that he turns into a serpent at one point, but also he strikes the rock and the water comes flowing out of it.
Yes.
So Moses has got a staff. I didn't think about that till right now.
Nice.
But there is another transcendent entity, and that is the market, because that's what Musburger's trying to play. But justice prevails, and the market punishes him. So I mean, there is this weird idea of the market as this divine and just force.
The invisible hand.
It's the invisible hand, and it also brings Norville not only to success but wealth. So that's a weird, sick thing about the film. Is it's like the market appears as this quasi-divine force of divine justice. And anyway,
there's that crazy moment near the beginning. It's just after Hudsucker has gone out the window, and Musburger describes his plan for finding the pawn, the patsy, and they're saying, it can work, it will work. And Musburger says, he's looking at the stock thing, right? He says, it's working already. Like, how could it be working already? They haven't even done anything. But it's almost as if they have so much power that just by talking about it, they're already making it happen. It's a very interesting moment.
Long live the HUD.
But long live the HUD. That's right.
It's like the king, but yeah, it's still there's the market seems to be this transcendent force. Anyway,
that's true.
But
that's interesting in connection with the long live the HUD, isn't it? And the king thing, because there is the sense of the corporation also as being this kind of transcendent thing. The individuals come and go, they live and die. Waring Hudsucker is gone, but the HUD continues. Yeah.
Do either of you get the table, that kind of Last Supper thing going on when they're sitting around the table and he jumps out the window? I kind of got some
interesting
Last Supper vibes.
I can see that. That's really interesting.
That's interesting. I thought of it as like a runway, the way that table is, it projects out. It starts with the little H in the middle, a little symbol.
Yes.
And then it projects outward like in reverse vanishing point order, and so
it's like an infinity pool table.
Yeah, he
nice.
just takes off.
Yeah. I love that scene. That's another of my favorite sequences in the film. His suicide is, yes, when he gets up on the table and he does his little wiggle like a kitten waiting to pounce. Right? I love that. His body language is unbelievable.
You start like a little running race. Yeah, it's great. And then on the way down, you got he's waving to the people.
Oh yeah, right. He doesn't want them to get hurt. He still has the presence of mind. I know the whole thing is just so. It's done in such a funny way that, of course, you sort of forget or don't take seriously that it's a suicide. I mean, this is how this movie essentially opens, with a suicide. That's crazy.
It's the magic of black comedy, isn't it? That can face these awful.
Yep.
Peter, do you want to jump in with some of your Coen brothers themes observed?
Oh, I think we've hit them all, Frank, except maybe unless we want to talk more about Head and Heart. But which I guess I think we've hit that enough. I'm okay with these. We had nihilism as capitalism. We had Head and Heart as the dialectic between Musburger and Norville, but also about there is this insistence that we saw in Barton Fink about there has to be heart in art. Like what was her name? The woman.
Oh, Audrey. Yeah. Yes.
Audrey. Right. Audrey. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. But she's talking about the importance of heart, and the newspaper guy here is talking about the importance of heart. And if anything, the company does seem heartless, in so many, especially Musburger. Even in the aesthetics of it, it's just a heartless, empty place. But so I think that's an ongoing theme here: the fight against nihilism, the skepticism about others, the issue of self-knowledge. These are all Coen brothers themes, I think, and the playing with genre. I mean, this is one of the most genre-laden texts and reference-laden text anyway.
Everything is like a reference to something else, to another specific movie or to something we see in a certain kind of movie. But yeah, nothing feels like it is just for its own sake, in a sense.
I thought to myself, that's one reason maybe it didn't succeed commercially. And it was like, what are they thinking, in the sense that, I guess they might have thought we love these films so much, these screwball comedies, they're so awesome. Let's make another one in our own fashion. And people will love it too, because they've got such powerful entertainment value. There's just so much joy in watching them. There's so much interesting qualities to them. But maybe because the general public doesn't have that literacy with all the different, references, it just wasn't as fun,
Maybe so. Although, a few years later, they make Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is a very similar approach in a lot of ways, and it does very well. That was their most successful film up to that time. So who knows?
Why do you think it didn't succeed then? Was it
you're asking me to speculate about the American movie-going public. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm out of my element.
I honestly think that the title hurt the film.
It is true. I cannot think of a blockbuster movie with the word proxy in the title.
Right. It's such a stock market-y word. I also think that the chemistry between the main characters, for me, just didn't make it. I just don't think they just didn't have the chemistry.
No, I think, again, I would put that down to it. I think it's intentional. They didn't want it to work. But then, of course, how do you sell a movie to a lot of people if they're not supposed to be emotionally attached to it? And that's what people want, to get emotionally involved. So.
Hey, Troy, do you want to jump in with some Coen Brothers themes, or what do you got?
The big one we've touched on a lot. There's one I want to come back to because I always come back to it, and it's very much here, very present. It is the theme of piercing borders and violating boundaries, which I talked about a lot in respect to Barton Fink, but it's in the earlier films as well. Very much here in particular, of course, the central case would be Waring Hudsucker going through that window. And the more I think about that window and the boundaries that it represents, between inside and outside, obviously, but also quite literally life and death.
The boardroom and the street.
The boardroom and the street. And so, there's a mirroring. So first of all, there's this clear class division thing going on. And so part of the boundary is between, and we've talked about this a little already, the lower floors and the upper floors, the executives and the hoi polloi. There's that very telling moment. Again, it's right after he goes out the window when Musburger's checking on the bylaws and that guy at the end, I forget his name. Is it Anderson? No, it's the other guy. I forget his name. But the guy says, he explains the company bylaws to him, and that come the first of the year, anybody will be able to buy. And Musburger says something like, you mean any slob in a smelly T-shirt will be able to buy that sucker stock? Right. I mean, his class, his assumptions about class are just laid so bare. And so unashamedly in that moment. And you see, and I think it's no accident that as he's saying this, he's standing in this room with the broken window and the howling wind sort of coming through. You can see that he's this man who, in a way, as strong as he seems, is ruled by fear. He's got this fear of chaos, or this fear of nihilism, really. I think this goes back to nihilism, that he thinks strong order and law and strong boundaries are what's necessary to keep them on top, but also just to keep people safe. And so Waring Hudsucker has gone, and he's literally pierced a boundary. He's broken a window. And now the hordes, the masses are going to come flooding through that broken window, right? This is his fear. And this is why he reacts by coming up with this plot. How can we stop this?
Oh, there's your socialist moment too, because he's worried about the people getting control of the means of production.
Yes, exactly. That is his fear, because that's chaos for him. Or again, that's nihilism, right? His whole worldview, the structure of society is built on these class divisions that they've maintained. So I think that moment is very important. I think that broken window, in a way, reminds me, again, going forward to Fargo, I'm thinking of the kidnappers breaking the plate glass window in Fargo. Of course, now they break it to come in. It's the outside coming in, which we've seen a lot of examples of. But, Hudsucker, in a sense, Waring Hudsucker, when he goes through the window, it's the inside going out.
Well, the elevator is like a boundary thing too. And it's also in Barton Fink, but it's also here.
Yes.
It's what he takes in order to appear up in the upper echelon there.
That's right. And isn't it interesting in both of these, and this is very true to the times, but in both of these, the elevators have operators, right? They're not just open for anybody to use. They have people who man them and sort of control them. So you have to have the consent of the elevator operator to use that. So of course the blue letter becomes, Norville's ticket to be able to pierce that boundary and move up to the top.
I mean, there's the envelope is a kind of boundary, it's opening the envelope to reveal something, but I guess
that's true. No, I like that.
I think the clothing is also interesting with that. But I'm not sure it's a boundary, but we remember where is the double stitching that saves, and it's the kindness of like a working guy who doesn't gives the boss
more than he paid for, right? Somebody who steps outside of the capitalist system and said, even though this guy's too cheap to pay for it, I'm going to give it to him anyway. It saves his life.
Well, he says something like, Musburger, he's a nice man.
He's such a nice man. I give him the double stitch. That's a good stitch. Yeah. Okay. But that's also a great scene, of course, because that's the scene where Musburger literally goes out the window and he's hanging over the void. So he's got this fear of nihilism, fear of the void. So at various points in this film, various people are hanging over the void. That's Musburger's term. And yeah, the thing that saves him is precisely and literally the fact that this guy gives him the double stitch. Which, by the way, another side note on that, but I love this. There's the two little flashbacks, right, that tell the story. The first flashback is Musburger saying to him, no, the single stitch is fine, right? I don't want to pad your account and so on. And it's presented as Musburger's memory. He remembers saying this because he's hanging out the window thinking, oh, shit, what have I done? The second one is also presented as his flashback, but that makes no sense because he's not there, right? The second one is just the tailor on his own that night saying that what you just said, right? I'll give him he's a nice man. I give him a double stitch. It's a nice stitch, right? So, I mean, it makes no sense presentation wise, unless, what's really going on is we're getting this view into objective reality that nobody in the film knows about except that tailor. So suddenly we're seeing the film through the tailor's eyes, which is just for that moment, which I think is really lovely.
And all movies, I guess, use costume in these ways. But I mean, you could see Norville as he changes his costume, he changes his person too. And there's, Amy's asking her colleagues, like, "Is this mannish?" Her outfit that she's wearing.
All these signifiers, of who you are, where you belong, where your place is. And then also in terms of the
Norville in his golf suit, remember, it comes in at the end with that ridiculous.
Oh my God. That's amazing. They're the costume people on this film, like the set design people. They're a bunch of geniuses, man. They're incredible. I think this came up very briefly earlier, but when we were talking about Barton Fink, when we were talking about Blood Simple, in connection with this theme, we mentioned the underside of the pipe, and then in the sink, and then in Barton Fink, there's the inside of the wall and the pipes. Of course, in this film, we have the interior gears, the mechanisms of the huge clock. We've got, as one of you mentioned earlier, the tubes down in the mailroom, right? We have, again, all these visual depictions of the inner workings, the stuff people aren't supposed to see. And of course, that makes so much sense because we as the audience are privileged to be given this view of the inner workings where when they're coming up with their conspiracy in their little secret boardroom, we're there listening. We know all about it. So we see the inner workings of capitalism. And then they're literally depicted in these various ways. And I especially love the idea of Musburger's secret office behind the clock. And then again, a great border violation or boundary crossing of Amy Archer later on going through that door and finding that secret space and the inner gears of the clock and so on. So there's a lot of great visual depiction. Yeah, and that's where she meets Moses.
Yeah, besides telling her that she's not happy, he also says, "Oh, I know just about everything."
That's right, which he does. So anyway, that's the other thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of Coen themes, and it really, to me, ties almost all these films together in one way or another. You see this somewhere in this film, and it feels really closely connected to their major themes of whatever the film is.
Yeah, nice.
Well, should we jump quickly, I think, to the music soundtrack kind of sound?
You're the expert, Robert.
Well, no, I'm not the expert. But it's interesting that, and Troy, you made this point that the theme is based on the, I think it's a ballet by the Soviet composer Khachaturian, right? And it's from his Adagio of Spartacus and Phrygia. The ballet is Spartacus. And I think the opening theme is so, we talked before about whether the music, I think it was Miller's Crossing, Peter, you and I were saying, it just doesn't quite fit. Yeah. This fits so stupendously. The opening scene, and they go into that crescendo, and it says man, that is the beautiful orchestration and just a perfect choice of music. It fits the scene, it fits the time, those kinds of films. So I thought the music was amazing, and they also borrow from the same ballet later on when the kid has the when the kid's doing his hula hoop thing. Then that Khachaturian music it's often used with jugglers and
the saber dance. I think there maybe are two pieces, or maybe they're part of the same piece used in that sequence from him, and one of them is that famous saber dance, which is I think the best known piece of music by Khachaturian.
Yeah.
And it really works wonderfully. I mean, it's not as if they had to sort of shoehorn that in. I mean, it accompanies the action perfectly. But yeah, I love the idea of accompanying this capitalist fable with this music of a Soviet composer who, in fact, if you read his bio at one point, got in trouble with the Soviet authorities for being too elitist in his compositions or something like that. So I think there's some very interesting things going on sort of under the hood that I have no doubt the Coens and Carter Burwell were thinking about when they were adapting this.
Well, and also, of course, Spartacus is a slave revolt guy.
Right. Oh my God. I never even thought of that. Of course. Yes.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
In the ballet or in the story that is developed there's the rescue of women from slavery in particular. So Spartacus, like Norval, rescues women from Archer from slavery of capital. I don't know.
From the slavery of being a successful journalist.
That's right. I mean, that's the right? That's the troubling bit, isn't it?
Again, I don't find it troubling because I think we're not supposed to approve of this.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I'll just say about the music is there's one little bit where they're at the club and there's that singer who's obviously supposed to be like a Dean Martin kind of a guy.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Peter Gallagher.
Peter Gallagher plays. Yeah, that's a great. I'd forgotten all about that scene. It's wonderful.
That's so good. Yeah.
Well, the tune he's singing, when I looked it up, it's called "Memories Are Made of This."
Ah, nice.
So again, we have the
the whole thing, right?
Memory with circle
Nice.
comes back.
The whole thing is, and so if practically the whole film is a flashback, those scenes with the tailor are flashbacks within flashbacks. That's really cool.
Nice.
Who wants to jump in with our final category, cinematic plot character observations?
Here's a couple of quick things. Here's a little Easter egg. It was Rumpus Magazine a few years ago. One of the reporters works for Rumpus Magazine and calls Norville the most eligible bachelor. So, of course, that's an old Barton Fink thing. Where's the Rumpus? So now we know
great.
It's in the Hudsucker building. I already mentioned I thought the angel coming down was an allusion to Wizard of Oz, and the cityscape to me was almost like an anti-Oz. And of course, it's about money and gold. And that's an interesting connection there. We talked about His Girl Friday. We talked about It's a Wonderful Life. We talked about HUD. We talked about J.J. Hudsucker in the 1957 film Sweet Smell of Success. And we talked about the Lady Eve. I mean, a couple of things we didn't mention was the big clock in modern times, and the way that the cityscape also looks like Metropolis a bit. I mean, I could just see flying cars kind of zooming around in that space, and so that that also plays on the kind of way that the system is exploitive, and how the view from the top is different from the view at the bottom, and how it even though it's supposed to be like a time of prosperity and joy for the United States, it seems bleak. You're like, that's what victory looks like. That's what being on top of the world and on top of the thing looks like. It's pretty bleak, and there's a giant kind of critique, I think, of just what are thought to be the good old days of American capitalism and American power and dominance. Doesn't look so great, does it? Yeah, and then of course, Metropolis. So those are some of the cinematic observations. I already talked about my critiques of comparing them, Barbara Stanwyck and Rosalind Russell with the film here, but and also Katharine Hepburn we should talk about too. She's another Amy Archer is kind of amalgam of all three of those. I think when I think of who was Amy Archer, it's Tracy Lords, it's Hildy, and it's Eve. In those three films, so those kind of bring it together. We talked about the sets, but so I don't know. We've talked a lot about this. Maybe you always want to. That was what I had in my list, and maybe you want to add to it.
Well, Troy, you have your cinematic plot character observations, and then you can.
I think we've covered so much. I think I just have a couple things to say. The first one will relate back to the broken window. I didn't mention, but I think this counts because I think this falls under character observations for Sidney Musburger. That first of all, again, this goes back to his fear of nihilism and his desire to maintain control. His response, of course, as we find out towards the end of the film, is to replace that glass with plexiglass, which is unbreakable, as we find out when one of the people on the board tries to jump through it at a certain moment. And of course, what this makes clear, which is quite wonderful, is that, again, this boardroom, in a sense, is basically a prison, right? He's trying to keep people out, but he's also trying to keep people in. People can't get out at this point. And so there's this nice, again, part of the critique going on here, I think, is at a deep level. It's not just the wage slaves down on the bottom floor that are being exploited and who are trapped here. There's a sense in which the executives are also trapped. They're all part of the system. None of them can get out. So at the end, that boardroom becomes kind of a literal prison. It's also true, of course, and I should have mentioned this. I mentioned Musburger going out the window in the scene with the pants and the stitch and all that. But he goes out the window twice because near the end, when he essentially loses his mind, he deliberately goes out the window and it looks like he's going to jump. So it's interesting that this guy, who, if I'm right, is terribly afraid of meaninglessness and chaos and equates the outside of the boardroom with that. Should then choose to go out the window into that at the end of the film. So I think there's something very interesting going on there. And then finally, I wanted to mention something in connection with this Oz thing that Peter brought up, because Oz is all over their films. It keeps coming up, right? I was thinking about that. This film is an Oz film. Of course, the great central theme of the Oz films is the idea of the man behind the curtain who looks formidable but is revealed, to have no power, which, of course, in this film is potentially Musburger, but it's also Norval Barnes. I mean, that's Amy Archer's quest, is to go at this guy who he has this appearance of brilliance and competence. He's idea man, right? Or whatever it is. And to reveal the truth about him, which is what she does at first, and then decides that she likes the lie better than the truth, I think, on my bleak reading of it. And so goes along with that. So there's an Oz story where Norval Barnes is also the man behind the curtain who is revealed to be nothing but an idiot behind a whole bunch of appearances. So I think there's many levels and many layers going on here, as we were saying a minute ago. But I think that's all I have for the moment. So Robert, what have you got?
Well, let me see. I just have a few of these.
Yeah, what do you got?
And let's see. This is something I read. This is not. I found this, but when they have the newsreel, John Goodman is doing the voiceover for the newsreel about the hula. The hula hoop is taking.
Oh yeah, that's right.
That's John Goodman, and apparently I didn't notice this, but when the credits roll, he's credited as Carl Munt.
What? Really?
Yes. Look at the credits.
Oh,
Carl Munt is in the
great.
credits. Yes, isn't that amazing?
Who's the killer in the Barton Fink? Of course.
Yeah.
Wow. And Bruce Campbell.
And Bruce Campbell. Nice to see him in this film.
Yeah.
Nice. Going back to the circle, one of the things that going back to the beginning with Moses, he says something like, "Yeah, it's one more trip around the sun." Everybody's, so even from the very first circle.
Yeah,
metaphor,
around the sun. Yeah.
Oh, the other circle reference I've noticed is when Waring comes down as the angel, he's singing, "She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes."
That's oh my
right.
gosh.
Yes.
Wow,
Another
nice.
circle, more circles. Let's see. The other thing is, so when we get to Musburger's office, that secret office, and we see the clock, the clock is actually, for us, the clock is going backwards. It's going counterclockwise because we're seeing the back of the clock, which suggests something ain't right, man. Right? It's like there's the issues of time, but are we moving forward? Is it the future is now, or are we moving backward? So I thought I thought that was not an accident that they had the clock from our perspective moving backwards. And then let's see. Oh, this is a one-off job, but when they're looking down, when Norville and Amy are looking down on the New York City skyline, and she says, "Oh, look, the people, they look like ants," right? You know what it reminded me of? Remember in The Third Man when Harry Lime, they're up in the Ferris wheel, and he goes, look at the dots down there. Would you feel any pity if one of those dots just stopped moving forever?
Yeah.
Remember that?
That really creepy scene.
That creepy scene where he says they're all just dots. If they stop moving, is it really that bad? And so I kind of got that it was like a little bit of a reference to me. Let's see, just a couple more, I think. So we talked about the tubes in the movie Brazil. Oh, the other thing is, it's funny. I recently saw, Troy, I think I was telling you, I recently saw the Billy Wilder film, The Apartment, because on the Criterion Channel, they were featuring Shirley MacLaine. So I watched the Jack Lemmon, and that the accounting department, like the desks line, they go off almost into infinity. All the accountants working. Very it's very similar to
Mm.
in the apartment. He works at that building, and they have the same kind of thing. You see all these desks going off with people
Nice.
at them. And I was reading about how they shot that. I was like, did they have a giant? Apparently, Billy Wilder, they as the desks got further and further away, they were smaller desks with smaller people, and at the end they were like
No.
kids they were tiny desks with kids to give the illusion of
That is farther away than
Wow.
they are.
further.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Wow. I love
It
it.
was really awesome.
Special effects before CGI.
Yeah, in Orson Welles, film of The Trial, the Kafka trial, there's a scene that's kind of like that too, and
Yeah, that's right.
it conveys that Kafka sense of the absurdity of these systems, these bureaucracies. And by the way, about circles, I was just thinking, you got me thinking. So of course, like the buildings the verticality is about like the distance from the people. It's there's a kind of alienation, involved in that from the rest of the world. There's a prison quality because you can't really get out except by going down or by going out the window.
Mhm.
But also, they're phallic symbols, and I can't believe we have mentioned that. And of course, circles are vaginal symbols, and so there's this playing of
Nice.
those
Yes.
symbols there. Maybe
I mean,
that's
Peter, your
reinforced-
mind's in the gutter as usual, but nonetheless, you're
usual.
onto something.
Yes.
I mean, it reinforces your view of Amy as a kind of harmonizing
Nice.
figure or a healing
Yes.
figure or a catalyst for some. I think it's her growth, but really for also Norville's.
That's great observation.
That
And
is
even
great.
you can even generalize it beyond the sexual realm, which is that the verticality and the regimented, capitalist the hierarchy.
Mm.
The circle doesn't have a heart. There's no beginning and no end.
There's
There's
no
no top,
hierarchy.
right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that it's sort of like it is kind of like the counter to the
Yeah.
capitalist.
Well, that's interesting because since Norville is so much about the circle, that suggests that he does have a kind of a democratic soul in some way. And that reminds me, I was thinking about that Frisbee again at the end. So if we do allow it, if it's not just a fantasy, which, I like that reading, but still suppose that Frisbee is a real thing, he invents it. There's an interesting difference between the hula hoop and the Frisbee, which is that the hula hoop really stays in place. You're kind of stuck when you're playing with it. But the Frisbee moves. And that Frisbee coming out the window is yet another
Goes out the
example
window.
of the pierced boundaries again. Apparently he's removed the plexiglass and opened the window.
He's removed the plexiglass.
So maybe there are actually signs at the end that he's, democratizing things and opening things up.
Wow.
Possibly.
You heard
Who
it.
knows?
Did Troy just say that? We got it on tape.
I'm coming around. I'm coming around the mountain when I come, okay?
We all change our minds.
This movie is so much about art and reality again, and making art fit reality in a sense, right? Denying reality. And there's this great moment when Buzz is in the elevator, he's doing his little spiel, and he talks about, what is it, Mr. Levin, floor 37? And Levin says, it's 36. And of course, rather than take him to the right floor, what does he say to him? Walk down.
Walk down.
Change reality to fit the art. I love that. I think that's a great little invocation of
That
the
was
film's,
good.
theme. So,
Well, the last thing I'll just point out is that the thing that Buzz is going to invent is the bendable straw. Right? So it's like, I love that the cones are like the Frisbee. What else what's a circle that
That's true.
I think we've exhausted our capacity to analyze the film, at least in this segment. Maybe
I feel like we got a lot out of it, I
think
gotta
so.
say.
I know this is like afternoons with Troy and Robert. It's great. Afternoons
We
with
dig deep.
Coens.
It's a deep dive that we do
Really,
here.
yeah.
Well, anyway, all right. Well, thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Peter S. Fossil
It's so fun.
from
It's so
Louisville, Kentucky. Troy Jollimore here in Chico, California. Robert Jones here. I'm here too. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging in there. And guess what? We're looking forward to Fargo. Oh my goodness, we got to figure out. I was
can't
telling
wait.
Well, that's a
I was
good
like,
one.
is that? I even said to Troy earlier. I said, is that a multi-podcast episode film? I
Oh,
don't. Can
it
you
might
do
be.
Fargo in one episode? I don't know.
I also just want to thank you guys for getting me to think about this film much more seriously. I had been so dismissive of it before, but now, obviously, that's how it is with these films, though. I mean, just go. You got to dive in, and you'll find, treasures.
You did, Peter, your estimation of this film has risen like a guy in an elevator with a blue letter.
Beautiful, beautiful. On that note, we're going to sign off, and we'll see you at cast. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, guys.